So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It depends on the time zone. So, this is the World Cinema Fund Day this year. My name is Vincenzo Bugno. I'm the head of the World Cinema Fund, and I'm here with my dear colleague Isona.
Hi, hello again. Good morning, evening, afternoon. Thanks for joining us today to the first World Cinema Fund Day live streaming, and we are very happy to welcome you all here.
So to be honest, I do hope that this World Cinema Fund Day will be the first and the last one of the pandemic time. So because it's not about the digital World Cinema Fund, which is maybe somehow demanding if we talk about organization, but definitely also very useful, because instead of being in a great, nice and small film museum, we can talk to everybody. We can talk to everybody on the world.
It's somehow kind of mixed feelings. On one hand, we are very happy to have such an amount of viewers from around the world today. On the other hand, of course, like everyone saying these days, we really miss proximity, and we really miss the fact to be with each other. But we are going to take profit of this opportunity, and for the next time, we hope to organize something more inclusive somehow.
So the World Cinema Fund is the funding institution of the Berlinale. Maybe, Isona, it would be great if you could explain a little bit with the shortest synopsis.
I will be very short.
So a kind of an introduction of the World Cinema Fund for World Cinema Fund absolute beginners.
A very short synopsis. The World Cinema Fund, as Vincenzo said, is the funding initiative of the Berlinale. We operate since 2004, and what we do, we support films. We support the production, the post-production, and distribution of films from Latin America, Caribbean, Africa, Middle East, Caucasian region, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and we recently added the Pacific Islands.
Thank you very much. I think now we should say thank you to our partners, otherwise the World Cinema Fund wouldn't exist. I would like to remember that the World Cinema Fund started its activity 2004 as initiative of the Internationale Filmfestspiele Berlinale together with the Kulturstiftung des Bundes.
Or German Federal Cultural Foundation.
Then the Federal Foreign Office joined us as partner, the Creative Europe Media, the media program of the European Union, the Goethe-Institut, and recently ACP EU Culture Program. Brand new. Maybe, Zona, you could explain a little bit about this new part of the World Cinema Fund and also about the other part
exactly.
of the World Cinema Fund.
I forgot to tell you that we support fiction, documentaries, and everything in between. And we have, we started with only one program, and now we are a bit older than teenager, and we work. We have several support programs. The so-called World Cinema Fund Classic, with the support of the German Federal Cultural Foundation. We have the World Cinema Fund Europe, with the support of the media program of the European Union. We have the World Cinema Fund Africa program with the support of the Federal Foreign Office. And we recently started the program ACP with the support of the ACP Culture Initiative. And this allows us to support films from Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, and also to strengthen the cooperations among this region.
Thank you very much, Isona. And I would like also to say that during this first part of the Berlinale this year, in the industry part, but also there were two competitions with real juries watching the films in real cinema. I'm pretty proud and happy to say that one wonderful film supported by the World Cinema Fund from Vietnam, Taste in English, V in Vietnamese, by Le Bao, won the special jury award of the Encounter section. So
We are very happy and proud, but not only that, we also had 3 other projects in the different sections of the Berlinale 2021. One, SWAT, by Ayten Amin from Egypt in Panorama, and we are going to have the opportunity to talk to her later on. Then we have the film, the documentary film from Burkina Faso, Night Nursery. And last but not least, the film, the first 54 years by Avi Mograbi, a documentary film running also in Forum 2021.
The directors of Night Nursery, the director of Night Nursery is Maumouni Sano from Burkina Faso, and the director of the first 54 years is Avi Mograbi, who is a very famous filmmaker from Israel. And to be honest, I'm really happy about this selection because I think that altogether they really represent the artistic profile or the profile of the World Cinema.
And the soul as well of the World Cinema Fund.
The soul of the World Cinema Fund. I think we have a big soul, particularly Zona.
But we are not only, we are a very small team. Actually, the World Cinema Fund is composed by 4 people, but we couldn't do this alone without the help of our dearest colleagues who are behind the cameras, Lisa von Spiekowski and Miriam Hense, and Katarina Nesterova as well.
So thank you very much for working together and being here together. So I think we are a very successful team and probably also a nice one. I'm obviously talking about the others.
But wait a moment, because last but not least, just doing the World Cinema Fund Day 2021 was a bit challenging. We have learned a lot of new tools that we are going to use in the future, but this couldn't be also successful without the help of the people of the Festsaal Kreuzberg, Jens Schramm and his team, and also Paul and his team from Lichtbilder Filmtechnik.
Yes, because we have also pre-produced a part of the World Cinema Fund Day during the last day. And
I think that you have already seen enough of us. We are anyway easy to get in touch with, and we would like to start with the program today.
Yes, I think before starting with the first conversation, I would like to read a short text. Because, I mean, we have a focus, which is decolonizing cinema. Decolonizing cinema are very complex topics, and first of all, I would like to read some lines about this topic.
So go ahead. Oh yeah.
I read it because otherwise I couldn't memorize it, so it's better to read. We bear in mind that the World Cinema Fund is an European funding institution focused on regions mostly dealing with the complexity of a colonial and post-colonial heritage. We try our best in order to be aware of the local historical context in the different countries and regions, and we trying our best indeed to optimize our knowledge and to learn more about these countries and regions. However, what exactly does decolonizing cinema mean? Is the film industry decolonized? To what extent has the history of these respective regions shaped their film cultures? In what way are colonialism and post-colonialism portrayed in all the films in contrast to current film production? Are filmmakers from the funding regions and Europe aware of this dramatic history legacy? What about the experiences, heritage, and results of the third cinema movement in the 60s and in the 70s? And what about the decolonizing and decolonized efforts during the last decades of the filmmakers from World Cinema Fund regions and countries, also considering that funding institutions from Europe often support the films? The present is a mirror of history. The consequences of colonialism are reflected in the daily life of many countries, and the topic is coming through in more and more of the project we receive. They cannot and should not be dismissed. This is the reason why during the World Cinema Fund Day we decided to give a face also to impressive and original Latin American and African projects focused on or inspired by colonialism and its lasting impact, directly or indirectly. I do believe we need to start to talk again and more about colonialism and cinema, about new colonialism, about the way to decolonize cinema, and probably, or sure, ourselves. Decolonized cinema is also part of an important artistic process. But cinema for us means also cinema space. As a part of a festival, as film professionals and cinema goers, we passionately believe in the social space of cinema, in the importance of cinema space, of innovative cinema theaters contextualized in the different realities in Germany, Europe, and in the World Cinema Fund countries and regions. I believe now, I strongly believe that we do need a definition, so a real definition for decolonizing and decolonizing cinema. This is the reason because we got in touch with a real friend and advisor of the World Cinema Fund, Viola Shafik. And Viola is joining us online
today. Thank you.
Hello, I hope you hear me.
Yes, perfectly. Hi, Viola, how are you?
Great. Fine, thank you, Vincenzo. Thank you, Isona, and thank you for reaching out, and thank you for the invitation. It's a big honor, of course, as usual, to be part of this. And yeah, in fact, we are all friends. That's true.
Before starting with the conversation, I would like to introduce to you a little bit better, saying that you are a film historian, you are a filmmaker, yeah, and you have written many books on the history of Arab cinema, which is obviously for us particularly interesting. But, what about decolonizing cinema? What does decolonizing means, and what does decolonizing cinema mean? So I think it's a challenge.
Yeah, well, thank you, Vincenzo. I mean, you gave me 10 minutes, and it is like, please explain the world to me. So I will try to be as concise as possible. But of course, I will have to go a little bit into history, and then in order to understand the future and the present better, it's always important to go into history. Well, what about cinema? Cinema is in fact, or has appeared during the colonial era. And what sort of colonial era are we talking about? Of course, we mean, and of course, the European colonialism. Cinema was also, part of the nation formation projects. So intrinsically, it is linked to also to what we call the othering, to the gaze. If we look at the very first films made by the Lumiere brothers, almost immediately they sent out cameramen all over the world. And of course, the Near East was one of the first regions which their cameramen investigated, and what they brought back is what research has shown is very often an exoticized and very specific perspective and gaze on the other, on the colonized in this case, because at the time the region was already part of the colonial projects of the different European countries. So, but what is colonialism? In order to understand what decolonizing means, we of course need, first of all, to denote colonialism. It is economic and political and cultural domination. It was linked to conquests, settlings, and the particularly extracting of resources, natural and human, through slavery, for example, and it was also linked to ethnic cleansing and the extermination of indigenous cultures and populations. If we take the European example, it was also linked, and this is very important to take Foucault's understanding here. It was linked to a disciplinary process. This disciplinary process was linked to body, or inflicted on bodies and minds. It went parallel to industrialization and capitalist economy. It was the disciplinary process was inflicted through the military, through schooling, through industrialization, and through the alienated labor that was necessary. So, which means, you know, populations, indigenous populations, had to be made, you know, to be transformed into laborers. There were also ideologies and mindsets linked to that. For example, the invention of racism was also part of the colonizing project. Orientalism was part of the colonizing project. And as we have learned from Frantz Fanon, it had clear also repercussions on the body and the mind of the populations in terms of what it did to them psychologically, created inferiority complexes of the colonized. So it became ingrained in body and mind. So when we speak about decolonization, decolonization can only proceed in touching on all these aspects that I was talking about. So decolonization historically started in the mid-50s. It was linked to the modern nation formation processes, and it extracted also liberation movements. The liberation movements thought very thoroughly about a new culture of liberation. Some of them were imbued with ambivalences of national cultures and of nationalism, which we now have learned also to dissect. Some of these concepts were, of course, inspired by the Marxist ideas of alienation, and this is why filmmakers came up with ideas like the third cinema. And you may all have heard about these concepts: first, second, and third cinema. The liberation movements, well, first and second and third, which means, you know, the first cinema, that is the cinema that was created by the capitalist powers, and was also part of the imperialist and the colonialist project. While in contrast, the liberation movement started, you know, sort of new guerrilla filmmaking. And they also tried to, you know, they created film collectives, for example, in Latin America, like Ucumau, or in the Palestinian Film Unit, or the Groupe Farid in Algeria. Algeria particularly became in 1973 already. It had developed into the new mecca of the revolutionary movements, and at that time it hosted the Third World Filmmakers meeting, and it issued, for example, a resolution. So this period, however, has ceased to exist, and with the new era of neo-colonial domination, as well as the spread of neoliberal economy, we think that you know, cinema as well has entered, as well as theory has entered into a new era. Now, we know of many, and well, I'm sorry, I have really to go ahead to proceed with a lot of headlines. I'm almost unable to explain anything because of the lack of time. So anyways, in the last 20 years, theorists as well as filmmakers have come up with a lot of new labels, let's say. We speak of decolonizing of the screen. We speak of decolonizing camera. Tui Y. Smith, for example, was speaking about the decolonization of methodologies. Nukona Van Ngugi, the Kenyan writer, spoke about the decolonizing of the mind, which is linked to the language of also. Well, so a new after the end of the decolonizing era, we know that during the time, a lot of filmmakers have tried to create a new way of filmmaking. Unfortunately, some of them have been in a way hijacked also by the so-called auteur concept, which is, as we know, historically also linked, and it has spread in the through art house cinemas and through art house festivals. So in a way, the market has been able to kind of recuperate and kind of recolonize, if you want to say so. And I'm a bit harsh here, filmmaking that came from the third world. So for now, I spoke of three aspects: race and racism, race and of the mind and of structure. So when we are speaking of a decolonizing project, we need to, first of all, for example, decolonize filmmaking through indigenous and grassroots filmmaking. It has to, and here we know of concepts of collective filmmaking that allow this, that give voice to the indigenous populations and trains them and allows them also to now to express their own minds. Because if we look at analysis like to Avi Smith, for example, was speaking about indigenous culture in Australia, we see very clearly that even our mindsets, for example, with the differentiation and the polarization between subject and object, between mind and body. This is a very European concept, and it does not exist it did not exist in indigenous cultures in the very same way. But we have transported that also into cinema. So what does cinema need? It needs a different language. I mean, now spoken language. It needs to allow different and a decolonized language. It needs also to allow a different gaze, a different perspective, and it needs to allow a different structure in terms of, we know that part of the film language is, of course, editing, so the structure. Now, but also economically speaking, in terms of what are the circuits and who is financing and for what reason, here do we prioritize individual filmmakers and filmmaking, or do we allow who can be in the end hijacked for by the market and sold in a way, or do we allow the production of a non-fabricated, non-standardized film making and film cinema language that allows other underprivileged and so far sidelined ways of filmmaking to come to the fore and to be heard and seen. That's it.
Viola, thank you very much. Definitely, I think it's a great start, and thank you very much for the definition. And I do hope to meet you, and maybe we can hug each other again. So.
Oh, sure. I hope so too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Ciao.
Ciao.
So thank you very much, Viola, Shafik. And before starting with the program related to decolonizing cinema, I would like to show you a conversation with the director of the Panorama film SWAT. The director is Ayten Amin. We have recorded the conversation some days ago. It was, if we talk about internet, a real challenge. And following the World Cinema Fund slogan, fiction, documentary, and everything in between, I would say So there is a kind of documentary part in this film. So regarding internet and the reality of digital connections in this day. So enjoy the conversation. See you later. Welcome, Ayten, Amin. So welcome to this conversation. It's about a conversation for the World Cinema Fund Day. This is a so-called director's talk, and I'm very happy to talk to you. So I do like your film, and I'm very proud that we had the opportunity of supporting this film as World Cinema Fund. And well, let's talk a little bit about this. I think it is a new step for your career. So in terms of maybe, not necessarily in terms of content, but also if we talk about the cinema language or so it's up to you. You have to explain it a little bit. But I think there is a clear line between your works, starting from the first shorts. And you have also produced, you have also shot a series during the last years in Egypt, which was very successful. And now, arriving to Suad, I think if we talk about content, there are many common elements. So what do you think about it?
I think it's a step in my career that I have been preparing for years. And I think it's actually very similar to my early works in my short films, and I think the similarity with my early short films, which was the first film, Herman, was the freedom, because when I made my first short film, I was actually working in a bank, and I did it with my own money, so I was totally free when I was doing it. At the time, it was the first time for me to direct, so I didn't know how it all went, so I did everything in the film, and I was totally free, and I did everything the way I saw it, right, not the way it's done usually in Egyptian cinema. So it was very similar to this experience, actually, because I had a lot of people who were working for the first time. My producer, it was his first time, so we worked in a totally different way than the usual way I work here. I think there's a big similarity with the way I started, and actually I love this because my favorite thing of all of what I've done was my first film. So Suad for me was the first time in my professional career in doing everything that I wanted without any constraints, without anyone interfering. And I have to say that when I made the TV series 2 years ago, it was preparing me for this, because the TV series was about social issues, and it was about the normal people lives, their everyday lives. And I started working with improvisation a bit. So when I was working on the series, when I was thinking about Suad at the time, it gave me the courage to do this more and so I had to take it a step further.
So you said at the time of your first film, you were working in a bank. So but you didn't rob the bank in order to produce the film.
Well, yeah, and actually at the time, the funny thing is, no one knew that I was making films when I was working in the bank. So when it started to come out, and people were writing about it in everyday magazines and stuff, the clients were asking me if this is me, and I was denying it. I was telling them no, it's another person.
Hi, welcome back.
We're back. I'm sorry.
No, you're not guilty.
I hope it gets stable.
That's inshallah.
Inshallah.
So Suad is the story of almost two main characters, almost, because we could talk about this. But this is also a film about a particular place, about a small city, particularly for the first part of the film. Why did you decide to shoot this film in this particular city, in this particular small town, somehow in the middle of nowhere?
The thing is, I don't know if you're aware of Egyptian cinema and Egyptian films. Usually, we don't have people outside of Cairo. All of the films, all of our films, they are shot mainly in Cairo, and you always have the protagonists from Cairo, and this is the normal. It's been very few films that actually were shot outside of Cairo. And I was thinking when I started writing, when I had the story in my mind, that I actually wanted to talk about people outside of Cairo because I don't see them. I don't see them on screen. I know a lot of people who actually work in Cairo, who a lot of girls, even working in cinema, who actually come from small cities. But the cities are never portrayed, and actually the girls from these cities, I don't see them on screen.
ما تخففوش. اوه شكلك لحستيني اساسا. خدي شيليهم بقى.
استني امسكي كده، امسكي سكسي كده كده.
صوري صورة كده، بصي انا كأني
الكتف التاني.
طب ماشي صوري صورة، يلا بس صوريها بس، يلا كأن انا كده من ورا.
بصي انا هنا.
وريني.
حلوة قوي.
ايوه لا صوري واحدة تانية احسن. يعني هاتي وشي فيها، انا هوريها له من مش من قفايا.
وريها لمين؟
مش هوريها لحد. اوعي تقولي لامك.
تقتلني
جدا. انت شفايفك كبيرة كده ليه؟
حطيه في بقك.
اعملي كده طيب. اظبطيه.
البيت.
والله شكله حلو قوي. صح؟ طيب بقى نتصور.
I think it was organic for the story to have the girls actually live in a small city, because the way they deal with the internet and the social media is totally different, and it was a major part of when we were writing is the relationship of those girls with the social medias. Yeah, for me the mobile is a big character in the film. Their mobile is actually, they're very attached to it. They have everything there, all of their life, all of actually their other persona, the other life that they wish to live, or the character that they wish to portray. In small cities you have this, it's very obvious that they have this attachment to their mobiles and their devices. Of course in Cairo we have this in certain areas, but not as the girls from the small cities. And you know, my co-writer in the film, Mahmoud Aizat, is an influencer in a way on Twitter. So he had a lot of followers from girls from small cities. And when I started telling him about the story I had, he was telling me about some girls who follow him, and sometimes they chat with him and ask him about stuff and about the media, about cinema, because for them he's like a window to the other world. So actually we had like a file of those followers, and I actually contacted a large number of them. I met them, or I talked to them, and they all come from different small cities, and they had something in common. They of course they were different, but they had something in common, is that they were following a lot of influencers, and they were actually talking to them.
Now, after your answer, I would say that in this film there are three different spaces: the urban space, the private space in the apartments with the family, but also the social media space with the mobile phone. So there are three different dimensions which are completely different. Do you agree?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course I agree, because our relationships changed from the internet and from the social media. So that we have a lot of types of relationships that did not exist before. So there is a certain life there that is totally different than what you have in your everyday life and what you have in your city. It's a third dimension to the character.
What is very interesting to observe in the film is also the strong complicity of the girls together, because there are many scenes in, if I remember well, SWAT rooms, and in this case they feel completely free. They also talk about very intimate topics, particularly considering the language and the way they talk about it. And there is also very interesting complicity with girls who are totally different, because SWAT is somehow religious, but for example, they have also friends who are real believers.
I believe that when you live conservatively, there's always a part that is that is totally not that is totally the opposite. Yeah, the total opposite. They can live it يعني, together as girls with each other, and this is very normal. This is very normal here. I even had it when I was a teenager. I know that that when girls get together, the talks are totally different than when we're with our parents or and normally in the streets. But also there is something is يعني Suaid is like يعني her friends, some are very religious and some are a bit free, but at the same time they are برضو superficially religious. At the end, even Suaid, when she talks about her friends, she has this like dual personality with them, that she wants to fit in and to become part of the society, and at the same time she also has a mean side, which is very normal to have when you live in such a claustrophobic environment.
Yeah. So following what you're saying, Suad, the character in the film, is a film about a young woman with different identities, but it seems that you don't have another choice. So you need to have different identities in order to survive and dealing with this society or with this family.
Yeah, of course, because you're not fully accepted. You're not fully accepted as you are. You have to maneuver to do things that you want, or if you have some sort of fantasies, the way you live them is always in secret a bit. Of course, you have different identities, and of course, even I don't think it's only about the society accepting her. I think it's about her accepting herself. Because part of the issue is that she doesn't accept herself. And I think this is actually part of the big problem that we don't talk about, but you can feel it in all of her scenes, that she has a problem with herself.
But we can take it in the funny and ironic way. Also consider.
And the internet has an identity crisis.
Because irony sometimes is also the best strategy to survive, and this is also maybe also because this film is very ironic and funny sometimes. I mean, the film deals with very tragic situations, but otherwise sometimes it's very funny. I'm just thinking about the relation of the girls with a very religious aunt. So it's I like it very much.
I think it's part of us. It's part of the society, that the funny part and the ironic part, and it's also a surviving mechanism.
ده مين ده؟ ده احمد؟
اه
ما توروني كده.
استنى بس هو نزل فيديو جديد اساسا امبارح.
واحد مخه يهنج بيبقى محتاج يطلع بفكره
اوف
مبتكره.
بقى يا سوسو، ده الواد طلع مزجام.
يا بنتي اساسا ما بكلموش بقالي يومين.
ليه بقى ان شاء الله؟ ده حتى اسمه احمد وانا بحب اللي اسمه احمد قوي. هو اصلا من فين في اسكندريه؟
الابراهيميه. عارفه انت كده اول ما تنزلي محطه الترام تروحي ماشي الشارع ده الطوالي اللي بيطلع على البحر، في
عارفاه؟
عربيات.
عارفه الابراهيميه.
بيقول لي ان ابوه وامه اتعرفوا على بعض في خناقه في الشارع.
لا يا بت، وهي خناقات قوي بتسخن جامد كده.
Hi.
I'm back.
You're back, yeah. Better. So is Suad clearly representing the contradictions, dreams, disillusions of an Egyptian girl of this age, particularly belonging to this social class?
She's very similar to a lot of girls I met, and I can find a lot of common points with her, with me and my friends, even though we're not in the same. We're not in the same socially, and we're totally different and from different cities. But at the same time, I can feel the similarities between her and a lot of women and girls, in ways like that you always have to portray a certain persona, that you have to lie to maintain appearances, and this is something I think common with a lot, or maybe like more than 95% of women here. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a film about two sisters, Suad and Rabab, the youngest sister. And one day, the youngest sister decides to go to Alexandria because she would like to know Suad's digital lover. And there is a very interesting scene at the beginning of this part of the film. So we see Rabab and Ahmed sitting in a coffee shop, more or less talking, because Rabab, she's 13 or 14, she's very shy. And suddenly we can see outside of the coffee shop some guys fighting in a very aggressive and intensive way. So what does it mean for you? Why did you decide to include this scene in the conversation model? It's a kind of portrait of a society, or maybe a portrait of a particular male attitude and word.
طب انت قلت لي سعاد بعتلي معاكي حاجه صح؟
اه بس انا مش هينفع اديها لك دلوقتي.
اديتها لك امتى اساسا؟
من شهرين.
بس هي كانت جايه من شهرين.
ما مش عارفه بقى، هي قالت لي كده، ما اعرفش.
Well, I was not thinking about male attitude at all. I was maybe I was concerned with documenting the everyday life that we live there, and part of it is that we have fights, a lot of fights in the streets. People are always very stressed, and they get into fights, and it's usually nothing, and it ends as if it didn't happen, like 10 minutes later, as if it didn't happen. But I see it every day, that people just explode and then nothing. And I felt that it was part of the documenting, and also with the scene, because it's very awkward and they're very shy and it's quiet, but at the same time something totally different is happening like 3 meters and it's كده اللي هي documenting their very honest and raw moments between them, and at the same time documenting the city outside from the window. I think it was part of just documenting the feel, the real feel of the street.
So the scene belongs to the documentary part of the film.
Yeah, and I actually, two of the guys there, they were with us in the crew. They were part of the crew. But the people with them, they were people from the streets who actually came into the fight, and they were starting to to try to see what happened. Think part of the people were real. And actually, this is part of a large part of the film is shot in the streets, and we don't use extras. It was real people, and
I'm very impressed by the actors and by the actresses of the film. So what about the casting? Because I mean, Rabab, she's a young girl, but she's amazing. She's really amazing in the film. She's always believable, and I think she's a great actress.
She is a great actress. Yeah, they're all hard for me. Well, the casting, it took a lot of time, and it was done. At the beginning, when we were starting writing, we did casting just to write with me and Mahmoud, and we did casting from girls from small cities, and we were doing improvised scenes, and we were just talking to them and documenting everything. And we had a lot of details about their life. So we started writing the scenes based on these details. Afterwards, when I was casting for the film itself, it took like 3 to 4 months to have casting all outside of Cairo. Firstly, I wanted to portray girls not from the big city, and I had a feeling that you can notice the difference, that they are not from the big city. And also, I was looking for girls who can have an input in what I'm doing. When we started doing the rehearsals, we were not. They did not read the script. Actually, they never read the script. All of them. They just read scenes from it. When I was working with them, we were just telling them. I was just telling them how the scene works, and we were doing improvisations, and then I came back to my co-writer Mahmoud with a lot of ideas and with a lot of scenes that I've shot with my mobile in the rehearsals.
Okay, and well, let's talk a little bit about the structure of the film, the construction of the film, which I like very much, because for me there are 3 different parts. So the first part at the beginning, which I like a lot, with Swad talking in the bus with different people, different women. Then we have the part in the city, and then we have the part in Alessandria. So it's a film with very different rhythms. So what about the editing of the film? It was at the beginning of the production, your idea to deal with so different rhythms, narrative rhythms, or it just happened during the editing process?
Well, the thing is, since we shot like for 3 days and then stopped for 2 or 3 months, and then we went back and shot for 6 or 7 days, and then we stopped for 5 months, and then so we worked this way. So the film was developing organically, and we shot chronologically. Actually, we shot chronologically the film. So when I started working, it was I'll tell you. When I started working, I was dealing with this part of the story, and I felt about it in a certain way. And then when I started going to the second part, I felt about it, and I was actually evolving during making the film. I felt about it differently. So, and I went with my intuition. I knew that it was not the same, but I went with my intuition. When you go from the Su'ad part to the Rabab part, there is a difference. Even when you're in the same house, there is a difference in the rhythm and the way the scenes are shot. And this is how I felt. And then when you go to Alexandria, there is a different rhythm, and there is another city, there is another story and another conflict. But also this is how I felt. So it kept evolving when we were shooting, and when I started editing with my editor. Actually, my editor, it's his first time, and he was 22 and he's still studying, and he actually comes from a small city.
She's younger. Otherwise, I had the impression that Rabab somehow already belongs to the future. She belongs to another generation. So she behaved in another way. I don't know, maybe she did these 5-6 years difference between the sisters are really important in order to understand how the next generation could be. Do you think, do you agree, or what do you think about it?
Maybe I'm very hopeful about the next generation. Maybe, yeah, she's another generation, and at the same time, she has a stronger character, and this is something we were thinking about when we were writing, because for us, Rabab was the real hero of the story. And for us, she's a hero because she goes through a lot, and at the same time, unlike Su'ad, she's always trying to be herself, and she's growing up in the process of a tragic events. But at the same time, even her lies, even when she lies, she just lies to go to Alexandria, but she doesn't lie about herself at all. She actually does she really goes into the journey that her sister never did. Yeah, I believe that the younger generation, I don't know, maybe because of what happened in the last years in Egypt, they're different, and they have, of course, a stronger character.
Yeah, so it means Rabab is probably the character in the film who doesn't need to have different identities. She's herself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. She's the only one who's being herself, actually.
Then I would say, Ayten, thank you very much. It was great to talk to you. And I do hope in June we can meet and chat a little bit without the digital world. So all the best for the all the best for the future of the film. Ciao, ciao. Bye. Thank you very much. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye. So, again on stage, and Lutz, Nitsche, German Federal Cultural Foundation, what I can say, without the German Federal Cultural Foundation, in German Kulturstiftung des Bundes, the World Cinema Fund wouldn't exist. This is the reality. And probably, maybe it's too much, but to be honest, this is the reality. Lutz, Nitsche is the World Cinema Fund fan number one.
Absolutely, the zero fan.
The zero fan. So, okay, because really I can remember very well the first day we got in touch with the German Federal Cultural Foundation. I met Lutz, Nitsche, and we started talking about this project. And suddenly I had a very good feeling. So, and after 16 years, or maybe more, because we met, I think, 2002 the first time.
That's true, yeah.
We are here talking about this initiative. Mm-hmm. And Lutz, I think we should talk a little bit about this definition, Decolonising Cinema. I think it's going to be a conversation. First, we said it would be an interview with Lutz, but now is a conversation. So thank you very much for your questions. But I would start with my questions. And Lutz, from the German Cultural Foundation point of view, could we say that The World Cinema Fund started with the intention to operate as an agent of decolonization.
Let me, before I try to answer that question, let me start by thanking you, dear Vincenzo, thanking the World Cinema Fund, thanking the entire team of the World Cinema Fund, and also congratulating you. This is a corona pandemic, but that doesn't shock you. You're still doing the World Cinema Fund Day as if nothing had happened. And maybe we are kind of in new horizons of connectivity, and things that we've checked out now will also happen in the future. But let me get back to your question. As a matter of fact, I have to admit, when we started thinking about the World Cinema Fund, we didn't really have the idea of decolonizing cinema in our minds. It was actually mostly about the idea we have got all these great non-European actors and filmmakers, and we need to get more of that in the German frame in the German cinemas. So it was away from global Hollywood, away from German cinema, European cinema, and the idea was, and this is kind of rule number one at the World Cinema Fund, take the money, take the funding money, but don't spend it in Germany. Go with your German producers to the places of origin where you really want to make your own decisions about how to spend the money. And this is what we did, and this is how during the last 16 years we got all those great films with these great subjective perspectives, crude sometimes, very experimental, very poetic. And that's what we love. And talking about the title today, this is heavy stuff, Decolonizing Cinema. It's like a heavyweight, maybe Mission Impossible kind of slogan. And I wonder how we are going to dismantle it today with this conversation and during this World Cinema Fund Day. And I'm looking forward to that.
What I learned during these days and talking about with colleagues and scholars about the decolonization, I have learned definitely that decolonization is a process. Mm-hmm. So you can reach a decolonized cinema in 2 weeks, or maybe not in 2 years. I have another question, Lutz. The Kulturstiftung des Bundes is supporting international exchange all over the cultural scene. Mm-hmm. What is the significance of the decolonization in other fields?
Well, there have been, it's a huge variety of different initiatives that we've started within the film field of decolonizing culture. And of course, again, this term is way too a difficult, way too heavy. But there are, let me mention just 3. There is, for example, Turn, a program that fosters the exchange between German artists and artists from Africa, and that's all over the field. That may be fashion design, it may be urbanism, it may be theater, dance, what have you. There's another initiative by the name of Decoloniale, which is taking place in Berlin, and this is all about the traces of colonial history in Berlin, which may be hidden. And what's important about this initiative is that we were trying to bring in voices from the civil society. So we don't have the normal experts. We've got experts from diasporic community who may be working in this field almost for decades, and it's only now that we're trying to bring them into the entire discourse of colonial history. And then maybe a third field of initiative would be a program that works with ethnographic collections, because they've got a very touchy situation. They have got all these objects, maybe human remains, artifacts, treasures from the colonial period. And the question is, what on earth are you going to do with that? I mean, it would be ridiculous to try to present it the way it was presented 100 years ago, but it's only now that these museums are trying to work very hard to find new concepts with reaching out, dealing with the collections, mobilizing objects, and also, of course, getting in touch with people, scientists or artists or what have you from the cultures of origin. And that may be one point, for example, where world cinema films and ethnographic collections may connect. You have colonial past and you've got a global presence, and how can these two things come together? Maybe World Cinema Fund offers answers to questions we are only beginning to ask in our entire discourse of decolonization. But let's leave that behind, the Kulturstiftung des Bundes. Let's get back to the World Cinema Fund. And I mean, you've been moderating all these World Cinema Fund days, and now is the chance to change the roles. And you've been asking so much, and now it's your part. It's time to tell, Vincenzo. And I mean, so many people know this book with this impressive archive of, I think it's 250 films.
We have supported 250 films. I don't know exactly the number of films included in the booklet, but we are more than 200, definitely.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So Vincenzo, let me ask you a couple of questions, and I want to start with maybe a simple one, but there are maybe two layers. Are there certain films that to you are most striking in the way that they deal with colonial history? And I mean that there may be two different layers. One is dealing directly with colonial past, or dealing with a system of coloniality that still dominates our presence?
I would say we have, starting from the beginning, when we started the World Cinema Fund, the idea was not, well, now we are going to support a kind of decolonized cinema. So the idea was to support hidden talents in many regions and countries who couldn't produce the film, or they couldn't really find an access to the global film market or to a global visibility. But obviously, I would say it was quite an automatic process, obviously also because for us it's a very interesting topic. Many films supported by the World Cinema Fund deal with post-colonial topic, with colonial history, or maybe, and I strongly believe in that, with the present of colonialism. So we cannot say that the world is decolonized, and I think probably, particularly in some regions of the world, in Latin America, due also to a tragic political situation, we can also speak about a kind of internal recolonization. So, for example, Brazil, and talking also about the indigenous population. I would just some examples. So in 10 minutes or less, we are going to show you a panel of Decolonising Cinema first. This is the title, Latin America. And we're going to introduce to you to some directors who have been supported by the World Cinema Fund during the last 2 years. And exactly these directors are really dealing in a strong and intensive way with colonialism and post-colonialism, the colonial heritage, and the present. So maybe I can tell their names. So Nelson Carlos de los Santos from Dominican Republic, Paz Encina from Paraguay. Paz Encina from Paraguay already shot some films focused somehow on colonialism, the consequence of colonialism at the Paraguayan present. David Preto from Brazil, definitely yes. Also, it's really, I think, the history and the anthropological historic structure of Brazil are the focus of his work. So definitely yes, we are definitely involved, and many films supported by the World Cinema Fund deal with the history. With colonialism.
Let me be specific and ask you about one World Cinema Fund film, and it's again a Brazilian film. It's called The Fever, which has been out in the Berlinale in 2019, and it's the story about indigenous families that kind of get stuck between their traditional life in the village and modern urban life. And I want to quote the director, Maya Darin. She complained, and I now quote, "Cinema has the tendency to exoticize indigenous people," end of quote. Vincenzo, what do you think? How do filmmakers of the World Cinema Fund relate to the cultural dynamics of indigenous people, and how do they avoid the traps of exoticizing them and using maybe even racist stereotypes? Who's in control of the voice and of the images?
I think this is definitely a big challenge. I would also say that maybe trying to avoid cliches is one of the main goals of the World Cinema Fund. And if we speak about exoticism, this is also a central point of our work. And we really try our best. I think it's also a process. So if you read a script, how to deal with a hidden universe, it maybe could be related to some cliches. It's a big challenge. We try our best, but we are, I can tell you, pretty aware of this. So we can improve.
Okay. We've heard in the presentation of Viola Shafik that decolonizing cinema is nothing, not at all that we are talking about right now. It's got a long history. It's been part of neo-colonial, anti-colonial, not neo-colonial liberation movements. So there has been a strong political attitude combined to films. And I would like to ask you, is there still a sense of guerrilla attitude among World Cinema Fund filmmakers nowadays, and how can you sense it?
Well, the concept of guerrilla attitude, if you talk about decolonizing cinema, was pretty much linked to the third cinema movement of the 60s and of the 70s. Personally, I think guerrilla cinema is definitely a good definition, but I think also that with the World Cinema Fund, we try our best in order to support the international visibility of cinema. And it's about film industrial tools and facilities, which are very important in order to reach, if possible, a global visibility. And well, I think guerrilla cinema making can be useful, but maybe it's not the best tool to reach a global visibility. And yes, may I ask you another question?
No, I would like to continue with this point, because global visibility may be one thing, but what about local visibility?
Local visibility is definitely extremely important point. So we are not supporting films for European and American, Japanese, and South Korean audiences. I would just an example. So some years ago, we supported a film from Nepal, Kalopoti. Was shown in Venice the first time and won some awards. But this film was not only very, very well known, so in the film festival circuit, but it was also the #1 films in the Nepalese charts for many weeks. And I was very proud of it. So we are not working, I mean, if I mean global audience, I mean also local audiences. Okay. So this is my question.
Yeah.
During the last days, we had many conversations about decolonizing and decolonizing cinema. So what about the next steps? Decolonization is a process, and the next step should be probably let's decolonize ourselves. So as a white European man, Lutz, do you feel decolonized? Or you're starting?
I think it's a long way to go, and it's definitely more than an academic catchphrase. It's a working unit, I think, and it deals probably for maybe a lifelong. And there are so many layers to this question. I mean, looking at the film with Ayten, Amin, you've got iPhones, for example, and they're being used as, again, instruments of liberation. But at the same time, iPhones are also embedded in a neo-colonial economic structure. And we're all using them all the time. So there are so many things to think about. And definitely, it's only a beginning right now. But I'm sure that World Cinema Films may help us to open our minds and open our hearts to so many things that are going on in formerly colonial countries.
Thank you very much, Lutz, and see you maybe next year for a normal World Cinema Fund Day, but also with internet and global diffusion.
We're looking forward to both. Thank you very much, Vincenzo.
Thank you very much, Lutz. And now, as I said during our conversation, we are going to start another video. This video is about Decolonizing Cinema 1 in Latin America. I have already introduced the panelists. And we are talking also about projects which are not films. So I think it's also very important for us to give certain visibility to the project and not only to the real films. So we are curating and supporting projects. So go ahead. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you later. Okay, then let's start. So welcome to everybody. This panel is an important part of our World Cinema Fund Day focused on decolonizing and decolonizing cinema. And it's also very important for us because we are talking about this topic, but we are also talking about some future films supported by the World Cinema Fund. So it's very important to us to speak about films which don't exist yet. So I think it's could be a very interesting session. So we are definitely not the first talking about decolonization and decolonizing cinema, about decolonizing and decolonized efforts. But maybe in this day, I would say there is a kind of renaissance of post-colonial awareness, particularly considering that in many countries in Latin America, but obviously also in the northern part of the continent, there are so many layers of racism, also linked to a particular political situation. I would say talking about decolonization and decolonizing efforts is also a lot about talking about contradictions. So everything is about contradictions. Everything is about ambiguity. So, and for me, the first most important contradiction is the language, if we talk about decolonizing efforts. Because you live in a country called with a contradictory name Latin America, which completely ignore the formal cultural identity of the continent. Even worse for me, Continente Iberoamericano, which puts together the colonial time in the strongest way, Continente Iberoamericano or Iberoamerica. Many people talk about Ibero-American cinema, so particularly in Spanish, which is for me pretty strange. So could we talk about decolonizing efforts if everybody, more or less, in the northern part of the continent, and even more in the southern part of the continent, everybody speaks the language of the colonizers?
I would be happy to start. Mari Lamien, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation. I would say acknowledging that we are in a territory that has been occupied is the first step, and that there are knowledges expressed in those languages that exist in the whole continent. So there's not a singularity. English just can't switch, or Spanish just can't be replaced by another language. We have to acknowledge that just like countries are pushing to be multi-ethnic, plurinational countries, I think we also have to think about our territories as multilingual and plurivocal, right? So I think embracing the vernacular, and I think Latin American cinema, or the cinema of Abya-Yala, the continent, I think we're doing that when we make cinema in our own versions. I mean, Spanish didn't pass seamlessly from Europe to the Americas. It's spoken radically differently in the Caribbean, across the country. In Chile, where I'm from, it's almost unintelligible for some people. So I think embracing the vernacular is one thing, but also exploring cinema in other languages that are not the colonial languages of the America. I'm particularly interested in that.
Nelson, if I understand well, maybe, or I'm convinced that language is a very important element of your cinema. And if we talk about the Caribbean is the highest level of métissage. So what do you think about this topic? So living and working with the language of the colonizers?
Well, the thing is, I don't know another one. Especially in the Caribbean, I think like French Caribbean and the Deutsch Caribbean were able to create a Creole, no, a patois. But yeah, I mean, if you see the Creole in Haiti, you will find that also there will be a lot of words in Spanish. So I think like what is more interesting for me, because maybe for the Caribbean thinkers, of course, is that the fact that we do not have any sense of, I mean, the indigenous population was, there was a genocide, there was nothing else. I think like the language, what it's behind that in my words, in my own way of speaking Spanish, is like an invisible resistance that I will be there. That it's something that will not be the same as the rest of Latin America will embrace. Maybe Chile, as Amalia said, but the rest of the Latin America will have a very correct Spanish in the sense of the Spanish law. So I think like instead of for the high class in this country, and that's embarrassing that we speak like that, I will find that actually that was a resistance to speak like that, and being and having this, the métissage will have this dialogue within itself of being the oppressor and the oppressed at the same time. And that is something very particular that happened in the Caribbean, that it doesn't matter if you are light skin or dark skin, you do have this contradiction within yourself. And I don't think that, I mean, I feel kind of uncomfortable to call white people in Latin America, which is an invention and race, especially from the Anglo-Americans. I mean, white could be something that is a color that you can see in the skin, but at the same time, it's a cultural and political term. And I think we need to avoid to think that we are white or we are, you know, I think like these rules, these things are very, actually Latino itself, as Amalia could say, it was also an invention of the United States in the way that we see ourselves.
También para ti, para tus películas, los idiomas son esencial, porque en tu película se habla idiomas indígenas, se habla guaraní, que es, bueno, en Paraguay es un idioma oficial del país. Pero bueno, tú siempre utilizaste el guaraní en tu cinema. ¿Puedes imaginar tus películas hablando solamente español? ¿Sería imposible?
Me costaría mucho. Es igual como un cine de una clase social media alta o alta, de hablar solamente español. A mí me costaría un poco pensar algo solamente en español. Nuestra lengua oficial son el español y el guaraní, y además en Paraguay los chistes son en guaraní, los comerciales son en guaraní. Cuando queremos expresar algo sentido profundamente, solamente encontramos la terminología desde el guaraní. Entonces está muy arraigado en nosotros, aunque somos parte de una población que no quiere ser indígena, que es indígena, que habla una lengua indígena, pero que no quiere ser indígena. Eso también nos pasa. Entonces es bastante complejo. Y por otro lado, hay toda una población indígena que tampoco quiere ser paraguaya, que es algo que de alguna manera me encanta que sea así. Nos llaman los paraguayos, toman una distancia de nosotros y nos movemos así, y es la manera en la que nos podemos entender. Pero nuestra relación con el mundo indígena no es tan lejana, no solo por la lengua, sino por la geografía del país, y también porque el 85% de la población paraguaya tiene sangre indígena. Entonces, no es tan lejana, aunque existe como un deseo de la población, sobre todo de clase media a media alta, asuncena, una suerte de ayorno de decir, tengo algún familiar europeo y bueno, en algún momento dejé de ser tan criolla, digamos. Pero la mayoría somos una mezcla de españoles indígenas o de españoles negros e indígenas.
Well, thank you very much, Paz. And Davi, what about your cinema and the languages? Your cinema is a lot about different classes. So, and particularly if you consider the historical development of the population in your country, and particularly in your region. So, what about the language?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation and the chance to share my opinions. First I have to, before talking about the language itself and my work, I have to say that it's quite difficult to talk about this topic for me without, without thinking about the racial inequality and the slavery period in Brazil. I have to say that I totally disagree with Nelson's perspective of thinking about colonization, and I have to say that it's quite even when we are discussing colonization, we are discussing from some part of the perspectives that we can discuss it, because we don't have too much other perspectives, other racial perspectives in these conversations. And I think this is quite important to understand what point we are right now about this topic, and what things we improve it or not, because I feel uncomfortable of talking about colonization without other opinions about it, other, Black filmmakers or, indigenous filmmakers. And I think this is quite important, and this is maybe the first gesture of, decolonize our lives and our work, and I think this is in Brazil specifically, and now I can start talking about it, the country that I'm from. Brazil is a country that more than a half of the population is Black, and if we see the numbers of filmmakers in Brazil, 90%, 95%, maybe more, are white, and I think this speaks a lot about who can talk and who can look, who create the gaze in our films and our film history, in Brazil. I don't know, I cannot talk about other countries, because even in Brazil, it's quite difficult to talk about it. But I think this is the first signal, that we have to be careful. And well, about my work, what I was trying to do, especially in the recently, is to create an arena, an arena of dispute. 2017, I met Igor Verde, who is a Black writer from Rio de Janeiro, a different city. I live in the south, he lives in Rio. We have very different experiences of colonialism in our lives, and in our projects, we wrote together a few feature films that we are trying to finance until now. Casa no Campo is one of them. And in our films, we are trying to put together, to create that arena in our writing process, to put together different perspectives and, and different memories and different heritages. And I think this is the things that I'm interested right now. And I think in my previous films, I was trying to do something similar, specifically when in Rifle, for instance, I went to the deep south of my state in Rio Grande do Sul, near of Uruguay, to make a film only with non-professional actors from this region, from the deep countryside, and to create with them a film and to create with them a script that of course I wrote before, but it's to create something together. And it's pretty much a film about language, because when we premiered our film in Brasilia, I remember in the center of Brazil, basically the first reaction was the audience saying, we don't understand their Portuguese, and then I think this is quite strong because we became deaf about other experiences in our country, other languages, other lives. And again, I'm talking about race, I'm talking about, different regions, different cultures. And to start, I think this is basically the idea that I keep thinking I'm trying to improve in my work. And basically when I'm very aware of the privilege that I have being white, and what is the things that I have to do to deconstruct, this privilege and in my gaze. I think when we talk about colonialism, and I have to say that I'm very inspired and influenced by the work of Bell Hooks, and she said that colonialism is about gaze, and how we look to the other, and this meaning of how we portray the other, and how we create this line, between us and the other, and how we can become the other also. So I think that we have to deconstruct our gaze and deconstruct our, not only integrate, but deconstruct the way that our system works, I have to say. Yeah.
Maybe during the last days, Davi, we talked a little bit about this panel, and you wrote, colonization and decolonization do represent the essence of our daily work. So would you confirm it?
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's quite, I think we can usually we are very cynical, I think, about this. We have to change the way that we make films, not only the films. It's two different things. It's theory and practice, it's the inside part, which is, story, narrative, characters, how we portray the characters, how we create these stories, and what is good and what is not good. The sense of good and bad, it's also very colonial. It's an aesthetic problem. If this film is good enough for the festival or not, that's pretty basic colonial gaze. But the decolonize is much more than that. It's how we make the things, how it is our crews in the films, how much Black people we have, are only, I have a joke that I said before, which is quite, I think is a perfect example of the horror in the film industry in Brazil. Everybody was saying, 2 years ago when Bolsonaro took place, that basically the whole ministers of Bolsonaro were white men. And I said, take a picture of these ministers and replace with a camera. And this is basically a film crew, doing films in Brazil. It's, and I think that's quite the essence, otherwise I think it's only, products and commodities and, repeating the story.
Maybe we need now a kind of definition for what decolonizing cinema could mean. And I think this is a good start. So changing the way we do films. Maybe Amalia, you can add something about it. And so trying to optimizing the definition of what decolonizing cinema could mean in these days.
I agree that decolonial work is a daily labor, especially in the field of representation. And it's kind of a two-step process for me. When I've been teaching, it consists first of that process of deconstructing. I've taught indigenous film, and my first class is a questioning of everything you think you know about indigenous peoples, alleged genocide, alleged elimination of whole populations, images that you get, questioning where you're getting your images of indigeneity. Are you getting them from the news in terms of like people in poverty and in need? Are you getting them from cinema and the Western that has propagated a very distinct stereotype of indigeneity? And I think there's versions of that in all of our countries, right? From structuring absence all the way to a stereotype of a villain or an enemy, right? So it's kind of one step is to just question the existing images, where they came from, and then kind of set them aside and be able to be open up that space for the ingestion of new images, to be exposed to new images. And in indigenous cinema, there's a different form of script writing. There's a lot of orality. You don't necessarily have a final script ever. It's a problem in terms of garnering funding for this kind of work, because the process is different in creation, right? And a lot of it is co-creation, collective direction. So in that sense, cinema lends itself very well to decolonizing because it's already a collective experience, right? The roles are shifted a little bit in indigenous cinema too, where there's not the single director as a sort of, a patriarchal figure. Its power tends to be distributed a bit differently. And I know that working with non-professional actors and other experimental and community cinemas also work like this. This is not exclusive to indigenous filmmaking. But within that, there are other kind of markers. So there's the idea of process, that the process be consultative, iterative, consensual. And then there's the how you can also bring in the local elements, the local knowledge. It's not just something out there. They're not just outside consultants. People often end up in the films. So it's being open and permeable and aware, and kind of aware of all the impact. So that's why there's so much at stake with indigenous film. When everyone has been silenced for 500 years. So when you finally get a camera, where do you start? What stories do you start to tell? So I think that everyone puts a lot of love and tries to get it right on the first time, in addition, because you don't often know if you're going to have a second time around, right? Because this is a kind of, there's a democratizing spirit to it, where maybe there's a priority to shorter, collectively driven films rather than one person's single feature film. So there are some sacrifices, but I think it's an exercise of like call and response. It's very dialogical. And I think that is the first thing, kind of deconstructing the hierarchies that the film industry has established and that gets replicated in film school, right? It starts right there. And it goes even back further to what images we are raised on. So I think there, first of all, you have to deconstruct your visual archive, rearrange the furniture, so to speak. And then you have to be open to new knowledges, new nomenclatures, and in film, I would say especially new temporalities, right? So we're also used to a fast cut, fast paced, background music always. There's so many ways that have been standardized of transmission of audiovisual, content. So listening becomes an important act in indigenous cinema. So it requires you to adjust and stretch your boundaries in terms of what you think you can absorb, right? In terms of just letting things go and just giving yourself over to that new body of knowledge that will come through this film to you.
So thank you very much, Amalia. I think we have now a key word for this discussion, which is deconstructing. David and Amalia, you use this word, deconstructing. And Amalia, you said deconstructing your visual archive, which is for me a very important definition. And I would add deconstructing your own visual archive. So how we relate ourselves with our visual archive. So I think maybe it could be a very interesting question for Nelson and also Paz, because somehow, considering your work, you you are deconstructing the traditional vision of the conventional filmmaking. And in your case, it has a lot to do also with editing. Because, for example, if I think about your cinema, your films, and particularly your project you're working on, so a kind of, it's not about a real chronological narration. So there are very different layers of narration. So maybe you can talk a little bit about it.
Es complejo para mí esto, porque pienso mucho que uno trata de construir un lenguaje que se nos es dado, que yo fui alfabetizada cinematográficamente con un cine norteamericano. Y eso en algún punto quedó como una estructura. Y por otro lado, tampoco me quiero olvidar que estamos muy tomados por la historia del cine, y la primera película de la historia del cine es La mirada del patrón. La primera película de la historia del cine son los obreros saliendo de la fábrica. Probablemente alguno de los Lumière habrá dicho ahora, y tuvieron que salir. Y eso ya determina una situación de poder, una colonización también, que es algo a lo que hoy podemos llamar globalización también. Yo trato de saber cómo yo miro, cómo yo respiro, cómo yo escucho, cómo yo camino, y hacer un cine en relación a eso. Pero me es muy difícil, porque enseguida me dicen, es experimental. No es experimental, es que yo soy paraguaya, y mis tiempos son otros, y mi forma de ser es otra, y mi forma de caminar es otra. Nací en el 71 en una dictadura, viví 20 años en un sistema dictatorial. Por supuesto, eso me determina enormemente. Y vengo además de una población no sé, de un país, me cuesta decir un país, pero de un país en el que existen 19 etnias indígenas y donde se habla una lengua indígena. Entonces, ¿cómo puedo yo responder a un lenguaje donde no me reconozco, a un tiempo donde no me reconozco? Yo nazco esperando que se termine una dictadura que duró 35 años, y eso me determinó temporalmente. Claro que me determina temporalmente, pero por supuesto me hizo esperar eternamente algo que por suerte yo lo vi. He conocido mucha gente que ya no la vio. En 35 años mucha gente se muere. Y entonces eso temporalmente me determina, y además estoy condicionada por una lengua que maneja los tiempos de otra manera, como es el guaraní. No maneja el tiempo que manejamos dentro, digamos, como de una población más occidental. Y entonces yo trato de responder a lo que yo soy. Trato de reconocerme en lo que hago, que para mí eso es un compromiso muy grande. Y sobre todo contar lo que yo conozco, lo que yo sé. Pero eso me lleva siempre como a un conflicto en el que escucho permanentemente, pero ese es un cine más experimental, o lo que haces es como para museos. Y yo digo, ¿qué me dicen? No, me lleva como a un conflicto como de que yo tengo que responder a una alfabetización ya establecida, y que si no filmo un plano general, un plano medio y un primer plano, estoy haciendo algo mal. Y yo no siento que sea así. Porque cuando yo me acuerdo, hice un corto experimental, el de Hamaca Paraguaya, que hice 5 años antes que el largometraje. Lo primero que yo sentí cuando vi ese cortometraje fue, es así, así yo miro.
Claro.
Así yo pienso.
Claro.
Y eso fue maravilloso para mí, poder mirar y decir, sí, es así. Pero estoy siempre en un conflicto en ese sentido cuando muestro mis películas, porque para mí es un tiempo orgánico.
Claro.
A mí ese tiempo me es orgánico. Y que además conozco literatura que es así. También uno lee Borges, y Borges se va por el tiempo, que Joyce lo hace, Y eso existe, pero en el cine es como que estamos así, como enmarcados, vuelvo a decir la palabra, en una alfabetización. Y eso siento que es un error, porque finalmente entonces solo todo lo que es igual es comercializable. Y no siento que tenga que ser así, porque entonces estamos regidos de vuelta por un capital y ahí estamos en un problema. Y ahí vuelvo a la historia, a la primera película de la historia del cine, los obreros saliendo de la fábrica. Me parece que hay que deconstruir algo mucho más fuerte también.
Paz and I went to the same school, very Western city, which is Buenos Aires. Brazil, Buenos Argentina, they represent Latin America, right? We have to be behind them. And let me tell you something, like since very beginning, I have a doubt. Like I didn't know that I really like sound and images. It's something that I really enjoy. I love to produce that. But I was having a lot of problems when I have to see a lot of films that I don't like Bergman. I don't get it. I don't even get this conversation that I have to be quiet to wait for another person. It's not my natural way of speaking, right? It's the way of speaking is like disrupt constantly and be in circle and we don't know. And like every time in the middle of a conversation, someone let's say, what is it that you're saying again? You know, this isn't the way that I speak. This isn't the way that I look. When people saw Cocote, for example, they say, bro, how do you like, how is it that you, and like, I don't know. I mean, like, because Paz says something very, my education had to do with see cinema from Europe, cinema from the United States. And that is also part of my identity. That's part of my subjectivity. And what Paz was saying is something that is very, very important, which is the production of subjectivity. And that's why I, of course, come on, David, I know the nation state from the beginning is colonial, is racist, is capitalism. Capitalism from the beginning is racist, is colonial, and is modern. Since the beginning, Europe and America born at the same time. Before America, Europe didn't exist, right? Because Europe has to build itself after building this esta identidad geopolítica, which was America. So it's the construction of modernity itself is racist. So what I avoid is that the production of subjectivity should be the weapon to fight. I don't care about decolonizing cinema. I care about decolonizing myself because this system is hurting me.
I think it was Ousmane Sembène, you know, the Senegalese filmmaker that said, when we think about decolonizing is to change everything. Is to change everything. It's all not only the you know, the narrative or the time, and you know, it's everything, because everything that we live is colonized. You know, it's a colonial structure and a machine to destroy people. You know, and of course, Black people, indigenous people, they suffer much more. And you know, and I think that when we talk about opinions, unfortunately, we will not have a Black opinion in this panel. You know, we cannot hear the other side, and that's why I'm also very doubt about the topic. You know, because all the time we only have one part of the perspective. We don't have the whole thing. And I think decolonize is to be doubt. You know, is to question, is to be open, is to, you know, to be sure is only to maintain, you know, the things and the violence.
Amalia would like to add something.
I would just add that decolonization isn't like a bucket that you're in or you're out. Decolonization is a process. So it's, I often say, we have to decolonize everything, right? You have to start wherever you are. and it's an exercise, and it's more of a verb and an action and a process than a horizon or an object, right? So we also can't be structuring and defining what a decolonial cinema is, because like you were saying, Vincenzo, we're talking about films that don't exist yet. Like, we want to get to a place where we can see films that are less colonized. But I think it's important to also think, you know, when you're tearing something down, what do you replace that with? You know, what are we prepared to even make intelligible other modes of understanding the world, other forms? So I think that amplifying the vocabulary, tensioning, stretching the canvas of what people are used to, you know, I think audiovisually is one project, you know, making certain works legible. So I would say what you're mentioning about the lack of, let's say, Black directors from Brazil and from Colombia and from Venezuela and the list goes on, right? So there's been a historical debt. There's a historical imbalance in those representations, and that means in those stories and in those images and the fluency that we can have with those aesthetics. So I think that it needs to start very early on. I've been working a lot to find animations in indigenous languages, for instance, because if you think about it, most animations that children around the world are watching are produced by 2 or 3 studios around the world, and there's a whole mindset inside of those animations. So it's been an interesting exercise to identify alternate films for children or alternate forms of animation that are not just anime or Disney aesthetics. You know, how can we decolonize the aesthetics even of what young children are watching? Because it all gets formed, that alphabetization that Bas was talking about, that media packaging that you receive, it begins at a very young age.
Thank you very much, Amalia. So decolonization is a process, and also film history is a process. And David, you started talking about Ousmane Sembene, and Ousmane Sembene somehow was also related to a movement of the 60s and the 70s called Third Cinema, which I think is definitely a milestone if we talk about the process of decolonization of cinema.
You know, I was thinking about when you asked about third cinema, how even in the movement of third cinema, there is, you know, filmmakers that were, you know, in somehow erased or, you know, excluded of the history. And I think this, if I think about Cinema Novo in Brazil, or, you know, later on in Brazil, the film history in Brazil later on, how different filmmakers were, you know, erased from our history. There is like especially one very important actor and also director with Zosimo Bubu, a Black filmmaker from the 60s and the 70s. He was a protagonist in many films from Glauber Rocha and different directors in Cinema Novo. And his career, or, you know, was basically interrupted, you know, by many different colonial reasons, you know. And for me, in my experience as a cinephile, as a film watcher, I think I'm all the time trying to find, you know, the untold story in our film history, you know, because Cinema Novo in Brazil, it's, I mean, in film schools, this is basically, you know, you know, the classic part of film schools in Brazil. You have to know Cinema Novo, but basically the main, you know, the most important names, Glauber Rocha, Nelson Pereira dos Santos, but you don't go, you know, deeper, you know, or basically the film school don't go deeper in this topic. And for instance, you know, Djibril Mambeti or Ousmane Sembene in, you know, different countries, or Luis Ospina in Colombia, those names are not studied, you know, in film schools in Brazil. And that's how colonialism also erase, you know, part of the history of our legacy, you know, and how we, again, you know, change the way that we look, you know, the way that our gaze to the film, because we don't, you know, we didn't have a chance to watch those films, you know, to watch those different directors. And this is again it's a problem of distribution. It's a problem of to create a possibility to those films to survive, to exist. And I have to say there's many in Brazil right now, and jumping on to a different question, a different topic. In Brazil there's many Black filmmakers, and I think they're doing probably, and I mean for sure, the most interesting work in Brazil right now, because really they are André Novaes, Gabriel Martins, Viviane Ferreira. I mean, there's Yasmin Taina. They are like really pushing, the frontiers. They are really testing the things, and why they are not well known. Well, it's a colonialism problem. It's racism. It's we have to change the way that those films exist. Because again, they're dealing with what is good and what is not good. And why they are accepted or not in the festivals. And but I mean, in Brazil, I'm confident that these things are changing for good because of those people, because of the of a movement, a huge movement of thinkers, writers, filmmakers, Black filmmakers. They're really trying to find the history that was erased in our country.
I would like to start introducing a little bit your new project, and I would like to come back to Nelson, asking something about your project, because your project is amazing, I think, because you put together different levels of colonization between Africa, the Caribbean, and so you wrote, the film will be, and I mean, the main character is a hippopotamus. Nelson, maybe a short statement about why you choose a hippopotamus as a main character of the film.
No, I guess, no, it's sure, let me say, no, I think I always, I mean, I guess I'm doing cinema, and I don't know if, I'm doing art because I always had I have a very special relationship with cinema, with imagination, sorry. I was a kid, I come from a working class family that I was alone all the time, very alone all the time. I should not say this outside, they will put in jail but my mom and my dad needed to work both. So me and my sister with 8 and me 5 or 6, we were staying alone in the house, taking each other. So imagination had a very, and as Amalia said, one of the first things that you have to do for to decolonize yourself is decolonize your references and decolonize your archives, right? So at that moment, I understood when I heard that story of the hippo, I said, wow, if I want to talk about imagination through this media, which is cinema, I don't have any tool to do it. Because all the tools that cinema, every time that took imagination to be part, like to take the fable, to take the fantastic as the representation of that, I don't have any clue of that to do it. Because it always been part of a capital cinema. So it was time for me, a kid that always been imagine, like all my relationship with dreams, with fable, with animals that talk, like this relation, this childhood that I had, I need to confront that childhood and make my own statement of imagination that doesn't have anything to do with capital cinema. So it's my first, I guess, approach to that. I don't know. Maybe it will be all out of tune.
Davi, your project, which is supported by the World Cinema Fund now, is Casa no Campo. You wrote about this, so it's about blood and history, about history and heritage. Would you say that this film, this project, still a project, so a film of the future, is strongly dealing with an anthropological structure that started during the colonial time?
That's that's quite a difficult topic to talk about quickly, but I would try it. It's when I was, I was writing another film with Igor, and we were discussing, many different topics, but basically violence and heritage in our country, and racism and privilege. And Casa no Campo became in somehow a way to approach the topic again with a different with a different perspective. And when you talk about anthropological structures, I think it's the way that we are writing the film is trying to rearrange even the concept of what is anthropological or not, and how we look to the context of domination, of submission, and the different things that were written about this topic through the years and in our history. Igor and I, we were reading Hegel, Deleuze, and trying to. That's quite difficult because in some way we don't want to be, we don't want to create a film that is super theoretical, and it's in some way we are trying to translate things that we discuss in our process of writing, as I said, in this arena where we struggle with the topics and try to translate to our story, which sometimes creates a lot of trouble because it's difficult to talk about domination and submission through one perspective. And this is how we reach it, a narrative that is with multiple protagonists. And with multiple protagonists, we are dealing again with a non-traditional narrative, and sometimes the people read the script and say, wow, there's too many characters, there's too many stories, there's too many problems, there's too many things to understand. But that's basically the idea. Because we are all the time trying to understand throughout the characters and throughout the different narratives that we have in our story, why the system of domination, submission is still happening through 500 years, 1,000 years. Why this is still happening? Why the question is not why we don't revolt every day. And I think it was La Boétie that said this in his writing. It's why we accept to be a submissive person. Not only, and this I'm not only talking about racial or social classes, but I'm talking about different kinds of layers, inside of our marriage, with our friends, in our work, we are all the time dominating each other. And this is basically a weird instinct.
Maybe, Amalia, I had a last question for you now. I would say at the end of this talk, we should really talk about the next steps. So what about the next steps if we talk about decolonization strategies? Should be a priority? Should first Amalia, and then should we start consider a priority to support indigenous filmmakers? Or for example, in Brazil, supporting more Black filmmakers. So what would you suggest for the next steps of decolonizing cinema?
I would say both. I think it's very important to create dedicated funds for Afro-descendant film, for indigenous film, and for community film, because some people don't feel comfortable in just one bracket, right? So I think creating a multiple kinds of pools is very important, and also decolonizing the process of application is something I've heard a lot. We show films in indigenous languages, we celebrate that, yet all the funding pools have to be submitted for Europe in English, for Latin America in Spanish. So I've heard some filmmakers say, well, why can't we submit in our indigenous languages, right? Or for example, if you're writing a script in an indigenous language and then you have to supply the script for some kind of fund, you have to actually translate the script. I've translated many proposals for feature films and for indigenous directors and they don't get funded, right? And they have me to translate. You know, what if you don't have somebody who understands the nuance, the vocabulary, the funding agencies, you know? So I think that the process of doing, not just opening the pools, but opening up the terms and conditions under which you can accept submissions, and also doing the right outreach so that everyone the information of these pools reaches the right people. And again, the requirements don't seem completely, you know, out of the question, which is what happens. At the minute they see an email in English, people have no reason to open it up, right? There's nothing there that says this is for you. This is an opportunity, right? A second thing I feel is that even in training, when you have filmmakers who finally have access to formal film training, the same thing happens. You know, you're not seeing film from your own community. You're not seeing a lot of even Latin American or Afro-descendant films. So diversifying the materials that we're teaching is foundational, very important. Translating your work. I try to get my work translated as much as possible. You know, I get it translated into Portuguese. You know, I write in English, write in Spanish. I try to really spread it out so that there is more access to our work. And I think that's a critique of the academy. I think scholars need to be more mindful of translating themselves. Otherwise, you have kind of one pool of a conversation and another pool of a conversation, and they don't mix. You know, folks studying the indigenous cinemas of Brazil are doing this in Portuguese, and folks studying Andean cinema are doing it in Spanish. So how can we cross our ideas if we don't cross those language barriers? I think that's another important aspect, and important to teaching as well. And then finally, the forms of exhibition also have to be more flexible. Right now, yes, we're doing everything digitally, but communities, a lot of them still have a lot of connectivity problems. So just because we're putting something online, we're not actually making it accessible to everybody, right? So thinking about like getting the work physically to where it should be is an important question. Repatriating films that are in European archives or in archives of the global north. You know, we don't have a substantial archiving and preservation system for indigenous films. I'm very concerned that how will we teach indigenous film in the future if indigenous films of the 90s and the 80s was all shot in video in formats that are deemed obsolete now by the industry, and formats that are not supported in our classrooms? Or if work is sitting there and it's not digitized, I can't show it online. So I think also taking care of our own collective memory of the precious works of those pioneer filmmakers, the collaborative projects with indigenous and non-indigenous producers, all that work, I can't transmit it, I can't screen it, I can't curate it at this point if I don't preserve it and take care of it, right? So I think there has to be more collaboration and consideration, not just of film production funds, but also film preservation funds, because that's our memory.
And Avi, you're back, so we were worried about you. It's nice to see you again. And Pas, you started talking about the last question, and it was about the identity of your project, the poetic attitude of the project, and the relation between the cultural identity of the indigenous people in the film and the poetic profile of your film.
Me hice muchas veces la pregunta, no es que me desagrade que me digan que hay una poética, me gusta, es algo con lo que me siento bien, pero me pregunté mucho por qué me dicen, por qué termino filmando de esa manera. Pienso que tiene que ver también con el manejo quizá de la palabra y de la imagen, que tiene que ver con la lengua guaraní eso, que a veces dos palabras conforman una imagen y que creo que tiene que ver un poco con esa estructura de pensamiento, un poco. Y quizá también tiene que ver con, y vuelvo a la palabra, con la alfabetización que yo tuve, porque lo primero que yo aprendí a leer y escribir no fueron letras, fueron notas musicales. Porque era muy chiquita cuando fui a estudiar música, fui mucho tiempo concertista de guitarra clásica, y entonces tenía 4 años y aprendí a leer y a escribir otra cosa, que creo que me dio como otra estructura de pensamiento. Y pienso que eso también influye en la manera en la que manejo los tiempos, porque me fue totalmente orgánico para mí entender que podía convivir una redonda con una blanca y que tenían distintos tiempos y que eran notas que convivían. Y por otro lado, la última película que estoy terminando ahora tiene que ver con una comunidad indígena en Paraguay, pero es extraño porque yo llego casi de una manera casual a ese proyecto. Yo quería hacer una historia de amor, en realidad. Y alguien me dijo, vení, yo tengo una historia para mostrarte. Y voy a esta comunidad y empiezo a desarrollar esta historia que me lleva totalmente a otra. Y en realidad me lleva totalmente a otra, me lleva o yo me dejo llevar o me llevo yo a mí misma, es algo que no puedo discernir, porque termino haciendo una película sobre algo que hablo en todas las películas que hago, que es sobre la separación, sobre las relaciones de padres e hijos, sobre los exilios, sobre los excluidos, con la diferencia de que en esta película yo estuve en los dos lados. Estuve en el lado del excluido, pero estaba también en el lado del que excluía. Es también así, un poco. Que fue algo que para mí significó como un proceso, porque yo armo un plan de rodaje y la comunidad, los Totobiegosode, me dicen, no, vamos a filmar como nosotros sabemos hacer las cosas. Ok, entremos a este juego, pero entremos con nuestras reglas. Y entonces fue como un caminar de a dos. Y de alguna manera me llevó a contar una historia que es universal, que es la historia del opresor y del oprimido, que es la historia de los más fuertes y los más débiles. Que esta película tiene como una poética compartida, porque tiene como una cosmovisión compartida también, de alguna manera. Y es un poco eso, es el destino de los pueblos indígenas, claro que es el destino, pero es el destino también de cualquier opresor y cualquier oprimido. Eso siento un poco también.
Gracias, Paz. Quiero ver la película muy pronto. y también las otras. So I would like to watch this film very soon. And well, thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you very much for being together this time. All the best, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation to take part to the World Cinema Fund Day. Thank you very much, Amalia, Nelson, Davi y Paz. Ciao.
Gracias a vos. Chao a todos.
Avi Mograbi, how are you?
Ciao, Vincenzo. How are you?
I'm fine. And you? I can imagine you are in good health, considering that you have been vaccinated. It's a good feeling.
Yes, well, I'm very well. It's you know, it's very strange to premiere a film while in your pajamas, but well, I'm adjusting to this new format. This is my first online festival, and I hope it will die very soon, this format.
So I do hope the same. So I do hope this next Berlinale will be a real one and not a digital one. So I definitely need to talk with people live and not only with the screen. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Avi, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to talk a little bit about this film, The First 54 Years, Manual for Military Occupation, invited by the forum. And just some questions. I have read in the presentation you wrote for the film, my films tend to get complicated, and even when my intention is to make a very simple film, many things get tricky. So what do you mean? Is the general attitude of your cinema, or is this particular one?
I don't think it's a general attitude of my cinema. It's this is how documentary is. It's one thing to conceive a project, to think about what you want to do, and to prepare yourself for the shoot or for the making of the film. But documentary has to do with real life, with reality. And reality has its own effects on the finished product. It doesn't, unlike a fiction film where your talent as a director determines how the film will come out, will be. In a documentary, you also have to deal with a feedback that the reality or the materials that you're using is projecting on you, and you have to adjust to that. So sometimes you stick to the original idea and insist on doing what you were planning. And I have the tendency to think that failure is part of the creation of the project. And once you realize that you have gone in the wrong way or have wrong preconceptions, you have to change your project and live with it.
Would you say that this film is a kind of a case study, and it's possible to have a case study about occupations? I mean, occupations of the country or of the region.
Well, this film obviously wants to deal with the very specific occupation of the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories in the West Bank, in Gaza Strip, but which is one particular case, maybe a well-known case, probably the longest occupation in modern history. But the film also aims to be to deal with a more universal thesis of what occupation is. And the film, I think, can provide thoughts and ideas for people in other occupations or people who experienced or participated in other occupations as to what is the logic behind an occupation.
Would you describe, you know, the main topic of our World Cinema Fund Day today is decolonisation. So it's about colonization, post-colonization, decolonization is possible. Would you describe the Israeli occupation as a colonial act?
Of course, the Israeli occupation is a settler colonialist project. But unlike other colonialisms, like European colonialisms in Africa and Asia, the Israeli occupation is not after the natural resources or the human resources of the occupied land. We are not there to get the gold or to get the workers to work in our country. The Israeli occupation, the treasure that the Israeli occupation pursues is the land itself. Israel wants to enlarge itself into the territories of the West Bank and Gaza, and this is the nature of this colonialist occupation.
Thank you very much, Avi. I would like to show the first clip, please. Thank you.
הזיכרונות קשורות להעלה הזאת. אני נכנסתי לבתים, ולא נכנסנו, אני נכנסתי, זה לא שהייתי לבד, אבל אני רק על עצמי אספר. והתחלתי לפגוע באבא, בילדה, בילד, באמא, לשבור את הבית. ולא עצרתי. לא עצרתי, לא...
So thank you very much. So it was a clip of the film with an interview partner, and this partner probably belongs to also to the organization of Breaking the Silence, or has been interviewed by the organization Breaking the Silence. Can you a little bit explain what this organization is doing, and if so you work together in order to develop the project of this film?
Yes, Breaking the Silence is an organization of veteran Israeli soldiers that was founded in 2004. I'm involved in this organization. I was one of the founders. And the mission that this organization took upon itself is to make the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories visible again to Israelis, because generation or decades of governments from all sides, Labor governments and Likud governments, have succeeded in turning the occupation invisible. If you travel to the West Bank today and you are Jewish, you can travel for hours from settlement to settlement without seeing Palestinians. Israel has created a huge network of highways detouring all the Palestinian, most of the Palestinian settlements. So this is the organization, and their method of working is by collecting testimonies from soldiers who served in the occupied territories and publicize them. And normally, the time frame that they set for themselves was from the year 2000 and on, because this is when they served. These are young people, most of them under 30. So they collected testimonies from the year 2000 and on. But in the last few years, Breaking the Silence has taken on a big project of collecting testimonies of people who served since 1967, since the end of the 67 war. And as the filmmaker in this group, I started editing those testimonies, you know, just to be able to determine what the organization can do with them. And then I realized that there was a larger film to make out of it, not just publicize single testimonies or compilations, short compilations of testimonies, but to make a more comprehensive film about the occupation as a big body.
Thank you very much. I would like to show the second clip now. Thank you.
מישהו הפך למבוקש בכפר מסוים. עכשיו אתה רוצה לאתר אותו. השב"כ לא מצליח לאתר אותו, הוא מתחבא באיזשהו מקום, אז אתה מתחיל ליישם ענישה קולקטיבית. אחד המופעים היותר שגרתיים זה מה שנקרא כינוס גברים. כינוס גברים, אתה בא נניח בשעה 12 בלילה, ואתה מוציא את כל הגברים החוצה. עכשיו אתה מחזיק אותם בחוץ. אתה מחזיק אותם בחוץ, לפעמים עד 5 בבוקר, לפעמים עד 6 בבוקר, לפעמים אפילו יותר. לא כפותים, עומדים ומה שנקרא עוברים תחקיר די מרושל, זאת אומרת שם משפחה, מי אתה מכיר אותו, לא. העניין היה בענישה של הכפר.
So we saw the statement of the representative of older generation of soldiers. But my question now is, what about young soldiers now? Do you think that they understand the sense of the occupation? Does the occupation make sense to them?
Look, it's very difficult to understand how we are brought up by the education system, by our families, to believe that Israel is a country that has to defend itself all the time from the enemies that surround us, and that serving in the army is sacred. And I also served in the army in the late 70s. I did my service, and I think that many people who enter the service do not really understand what it takes. I'm not saying that all of them will come out with the full understanding of what an occupation means and what the occupation has taken upon itself to do, and how it terrorizes the lives of the Palestinians under occupation. But some do, and definitely those who founded Breaking the Silence were kids who went very highly voluntarily, willingly into the service, and while doing what they were ordered to do, has understood something about the horrific nature of a military occupation. And this is what brought to the foundation of Breaking the Silence.
Okay, thank you very much, Avi, for this conversation. Thank you very much for introducing the film to us, and I do hope to see you soon live and not on the screen as a human being with body.
Thank you, Vincenzo, for having me, and thank you for supporting, for the World Cinema Fund to support this film. It's a very important contribution.
Thank you, Avi.
And hope to have a drink with you.
Ciao, ciao. See you soon. Bye, bye.
Bye, bye. Ciao.
Ciao.
Dear Vincenzo Bugno, dear World Cinema fans, dear Berlinale. It's a great pleasure to me to welcome you for the World Cinema Fund Day today. And even if we are all longing for more personal contacts, for more joint and common experiences, for more cinema, for the feeling of what it is watching a film and going to see a movie. Even if this is the case, it is a huge endeavor and a great success that the Berlinale and the World Cinema Fund succeeded to organize this wonderful day on such an important topic. The idea of the World Cinema Fund to support co-productions, namely in Latin America, in Africa, and in Southeast Asia, is a goal we share. We share financially, and we share with political support. And going from that co-production idea into the deep, digging in our colonial past, and bringing up the awareness of how decolonization matters, and the colonial past matters, and it matters to us as well as to those regions the European imperialists colonized. Bringing up these questions to the cinema and bringing not only the awareness, but bringing the conflicts into our actual discussions, but in a cultural way, is an important stake the World Cinema Fund is presenting today. Let me bring three aspects into your today conversations. The first is why it is important that public money supports criticism, supports critical filmmaker, and supports new thinking? Well, it's important because the public money is not only money, it's a sign and a symbol that a society is concerned by those issues. So it's a great honor for us to support you. Second is, it is an issue for foreign policy. All politics has been made in the interest of a national state. And what you are reaching by organizing co-productions, by bringing people together, by putting those conflictual questions on the table is going beyond. It's going beyond a national interest and is stepping into an international conversation. That's the second reason. And the third reason is because we are convinced that filmmaking is shaping an identity of people and the human identity. So filmmaking is the seventh art and is perhaps the most modern and the most important art in the 21st century, not only for bringing wealth, not only for developing creative industries, but again, for shaping our common memory and our common imaginary. To that extent, the World Cinema Fund is a wonderful tool for the Berlinale, not only for growing up and making grow new ideas of filmmaking and attract people to the Berlinale, but also to diversify our imaginary. Not only the common imaginary of the film community or of the cultural community, but being present at the most important German Filmer Festival and at least one of the most important festivals at all, shaping that diversity and bringing it back to Europe is an important progress, and it's part of our own diversity. So I very much welcome the actions of the World Cinema Fund. I'm looking forward to the results of your day, and I wish you not only good conversations, but also deep conversations and a good energy on such a challenging item. Thank you.
So we have started the Africa block, more or less, of our World Cinema Fund Day with a video message, with a declaration sent us by Andreas Görgen, who is the General Director of Culture of the German Foreign Office. And so I think it makes sense also because the German Federal Foreign Office support a very important program of the World Cinema Fund, which is World Cinema Fund Africa, and has been supporting the World Cinema Fund from the beginning of our adventure. Before starting with a panel which focus more on decolonization strategy, I would like to invite on stage Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese, a director from Lesotho. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for joining us. And I think, well, let's start to talk about decolonization. Jeremiah, you live in Berlin. You have been very successful, I must say, particularly during the last years with 2 long feature films. And, well, I would like to ask to you some ideas or considerations also after showing this film in many international festivals. I'm talking about Mother, I'm Suffocating. This is my last film about you. And this isn't a burial, it's a resurrection. So which is the relation of these films with colonization and maybe with decolonization?
Thank you for having me. You're very kind. I think somehow all of them, they actually deal with specifically decentering the colonial language or Western language, whether it comes to aesthetics or whether it comes to a space That's why in most cases I shoot in these particular places that have sort of relations to the land, have relations to their history, because it's very important for this discourse that we're talking about, that is specifically, the information is produced for and by the same people who are actually affected, and also who have this rich history of before colonialism. And so in a way, if you look at this is not a burial, it's a resurrection, it deals a lot with this ambiguity of spirituality, and also it deals with death metaphorically, and it has something to do with also identity, and the identity that has been stripped off from people for centuries, pretty much from 1800s with the colonialism. And also it's about sort of a restoration of the becoming that is happening, or maybe forging of a new identity. And also if you look at Mother, I'm Suffocating, this my last film about you, it also, I'm aware of the white cube I'm creating from. I'm aware that the first audience to see my film, it's Western audience, and I'm aware, and I'm negotiating between spaces, but at the same time I'm critiquing, for instance, religion in my country and religion in many African countries, that they become a sort of a part of colonial language, that it's by default, it's almost like it's inherited, we don't even question it. So yeah, I'm dealing with it in both of the films, even with my short film. There was a short film, it's called Behemoth, or The Game of God. It was about a man who goes into the marketplace and tell people that their God is in a coffin. And in the coffin, of course, is money. And the same reaction that people, when this guy was drinking the coffin, tells the people that their God is dead, that their God is in this coffin, people were very angry at this man, was actually happening in the street, and people didn't know it's a film. But they were very angry because it was sort of a performance art piece, but hybrid with sort of film and crossing lines of film. And also the reaction that I captured was when they found out it was money. And also I was looking at how capitalism and also the spirituality and how we react to it, how the normal people in Lesotho react to this, sort of mirroring what is actually happening with people in my country, and also what was happening in myself as well.
I think colonialism, post-colonialism, decolonization is everything about contradiction and ambiguity, because I read, and you started to talk about it, that in Lesotho, everywhere you can find the Bible. And the Bible, I mean, the main instrument, main tool of the religion of the white man. Mm-hmm. So how to deal with this, I think, it's very complicated, particularly, I mean, probably for sincerely religious persons who believe in Christianity. But it's a very complex situation.
Yeah, it is very complex. I mean, it almost feels like a rabbit hole because it goes deeper. When I was coming here, I had this picture of this people, mostly were farmers, and they were looking down, searching for something. The closer I get to these people, the more I hear they're stepping on the clay pieces, like pieces of clay. And they're all bending down and trying to fit them on their faces. They're trying to fit this clay on their faces, see which pieces is fitting. The more you get closer also, I start to see there's sort of a blood coming of frustration because they're stepping on this clay pieces. Almost they're trying to reconstruct their faces. And when they stood up, I see their faces being with the hollow. Everything is hollow on their faces. And in my head, I thought, well, I like this picture. Maybe I should just make them find the right pieces for this. But I realized that this is not reality. It's not real. So when I was thinking about this, I started to think of how much to forge or to restore image or self-image, it takes a lifetime. And it also, if you look at now with where we are now trying or to create a new narrative and trying to go back to our own sources and to decenter the colonial language and create our own language, it will take us a lifetime. I think we will get to the place where we, maybe not in our generation, that will fully divorce the language, but we are getting there, I think. And also, because even the idea of finding or maybe even forging the language, it's scrutinizing process. It's not an easy process. It takes a lot of unlearning and a lot of finding who you truly are to get to that place of your identity, to get into the place where you are whole. And I just finished a video installation of for Humbert Forum here in Berlin, the Palace of the People. It's about the child who, these children, they wear like a crystals on their faces. It's almost like a war paint. But these crystals, for me, it almost represented whoever is seen. If you are seen among the crystal stones, it feels sparkly. It represents the universe. It's almost like when you see the other person, you see he's a part of God. It's very hard to use the word God because it's very complicated, because I don't necessarily mean the Christian God, but I'm talking about like the divine or the part of the universe, becoming the part of the universe. And in Christian terms, they use the word called the imago Dei, which is the image of God. And I feel like that's where for us it starts. It starts with our perception towards looking at each other. Who do we see when we're looking at each other? Because with the colonialism came it came with a self-loathing, because you are reduced to nothing. When you're reduced to nothing, you can hold on to anything that moves. If you rob a person his dignity or their dignity or her dignity, her image, and then you give them God, they will cling to that God. It's a lifelong process, and the process of unlearning is a very violent one. It's almost like what Frank Fanon speak of, that the decolonization, it can only happen. It's a violent process. It can only be violent to unlearn things.
Why do you feel so attracted by the iconography of the Christianism, of the Christianity?
I think since I was a child, I remember when I was a child, I asked my mother, what's going to happen to us when we die? And then, of course, my mother is Christian, and she said that we will become angels. And I've always had this image of angels, and also even from the early age, I think I've always been obsessed with the idea of hell. I think it was threatening to me, so that I was so obsessed with it, and also heaven. And then later on, I converted. I mean, at that time, I grew up in a place that was very violent. And I remember when my friend shot himself, we were the kids who were like the bad kids. And many people will tell me that, even my teachers will tell me that I'm going to end up dead or in prison. This kind of things, and they start to make you feel like you are actually a lost person, you are a lost soul. And I think after when my friend shot himself, after that, I started to gravitate towards the church. There was a church next to our home, and then I would frequent there, and of course they will come and preach to us. So I became a Christian for like maybe 12 years of my life. And after that, the first film that came after that was that I attempted to do a film with friends who were just gathering with friends. It's called For Those Whose God Is Dead. And that was for me trying to revolt now, trying to now search for my own identity and my own spirituality.
I think that Decolonizing Cinema was about this learning, if this is the right word, a colonized language. So I think between the European or Western artistic tradition and the African tradition, I don't like to talk generally about Africa because there are so many Africas and countries, but definitely there is another approach to narration, to storytelling, maybe time. So which is the biggest difference if we talk about in terms of aesthetical approach and particularly storytelling? I think time for me is an important element.
Yeah, it's you know, I like what I think it's I don't know if it's Gabriel or Osman. He said that we should inspire to create the cinema that you can see with your ears and hear with your eyes, to transcend the language of cinema, where because that's our upbringing, where everything is so mixed, that the dead are mixed with the living, everything happening within one space, and to be able to communicate in that level. And I feel like for me, that's what I see the difference, in a sense of that, of course, you can bring there's another part which is like folklorish part of our aesthetic, that is a part of our aesthetic, or magic, because we grew up with the stories, and I think that's what comes out naturally with these films. It has something to do with magic in a way. I don't know, maybe I don't have a better word to, maybe the realism in that sense. And I feel like it's ingrained in African cinemas or African cinema. This is a very common thing that is ingrained in it. And also I think it also has something to do with the with the people itself. It's almost like it's a poetry that it cannot be captured, it cannot be written. Especially when you go to the places where you're filming, it's almost like you don't have to let them direct. I don't know, maybe because I've been living here for a long time, I'm starting to romanticize this. But it's almost like you don't, and I don't necessarily have to direct anything. All I could do is just to lift the canvas up, and everybody will see the story unfolding just by looking at them. And I think it has to do with the history of our people. So I think it's very personal, I guess. It's very personal. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Our conversation is a kind of introduction to an important part of our event today, and it's about introducing a group of independent initiatives in Africa, which are related to cinema as a space, which is, for us, I think, very important. So do you think that in terms of, if we talk about decolonizing strategies, how important is to create further independent initiatives in Africa and the different countries in order to decolonize also the market? Because, for example, in many African countries, buying a ticket for cinema is extremely expensive, and pretty often they show only American films.
Yeah, I mean, which is a tragedy. Which is a tragedy. I guess it's, everywhere. It's almost like this. There's the main capitalistic, industrial-driven cinema is the only one that is sort of accessible. But I'm really an advocate of small, like grassroots communities creating something like this, where they can actually have people to access the films. And also, what's important, I think, is when I create my work, I have my people in mind. That's the premise why I create my work, and I'm always even. The people that are always even scared when they see my work, it's people from Lesotho, because they know what I'm talking about, and they can see past it. They can see past the cliches. They can see past the aesthetic. They can go deeper. And I feel like because of this, of like even the setup of the festival, which I'm very grateful of, to be able to exhibit our work and distribute our work through the festivals, but I always also have the quest to find a new way of that the immediate people who could see the work that films are for and by, because they're the part of this canon, of this mechanism, of this ecosystem that we are creating as this new wave of filmmakers, and try to create the work that is inventory and that can produce sort of information or knowledge as a canon within spaces of people who come from the dispossessed areas. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Listening to your words, I'm sure you will be very interested in listening and watching the next panel because it's about this. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And we can start with the next panel, which has been recorded three days ago. Let's go. Thank you.
So it is my great pleasure to introduce 4 of the think tank members of the Cinema Spaces Network to you. The 5th, hopefully, is joining us, Chopa. He is shooting in Eastern Congo, where, as you might imagine, internet is not an easy availability. What we have thought is to present our collaborators, friends, first of all with the video presentations that they have produced last year so that we get a sense of where they work, what the spaces look like, which they have in mind and where they are at home. Afterwards, they introduce themselves and we start going into the introduction. So we start with a film of Sunshine Cinema.
Thank you for coming by. We're getting ready to start.
Most of us, we hardly go to cinemas.
There's no cinema around here.
I think it's important showing the African movies.
So that people out there can know who we are as Africans.
In the past, we had very few African-made movies. So these African-made movies, they define us. They portray what we are, what we believe in as Africans.
I chose to become Sandbox ambassador because I see many people, young people especially in my community, getting involved in wrong things like drugs, crime. So with this Sandbox, we will be able to educate people.
I wanted to be part of real change in community. I think visual things have an impact in people's minds.
Within my society, there have been challenges where people have been actually failing to have conversations within a community openly. Some of the films, it teaches people about activism and them having rights to speak out.
I do what I do because carrying these films back to the communities, I know that I am bringing them hope.
Sunshine Cinema is a solar-powered cinema network, and we work in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. We're based in Cape Town in South Africa. And the main premise for why we started the initiative was to make African films more accessible to African audiences, because too often they tend to end up in European film festivals like Berlinale, for example, but don't get screened on the continent to local audiences. So that was really the fuel for why we started the fire. And in February 2021, we sit with many exciting projects and plans. We are about to launch a 20 Sandbox ambassador program across South Africa with young people from rural areas. We are running virtual screenings. We are doing drive-ins. We have also moved over to doing some podcasts while we can't hold our bigger cinemas during the pandemic. And this has all been in the space of 4 years of growth that we have that have led us to this point.
Thank you. So moving on to Khartoum, we first want to see the presentation of the Sudanese Filmmaking Association.
Even if it may not be so obvious by the look of things now, the remaining theaters in Khartoum are only shells of their former selves. Despite years of hardship that have taken their toll on the country, Sudanese filmmakers still persevere to tell their stories. Filmmakers like Jadala Jubara, the father of documentary cinema in Sudan, or Hussein Sharif, with his unique blend of documentary and experimental cinema. These people were pioneers of their craft, and that pioneering spirit has continued until this day. There is untapped storytelling potential in these fertile lands, but many seeds are yet to be planted.
How you been doing this?
Mohamed, you're joining us from Khartoum. You're a member and maybe the driving force, I may say so, at least this is my impression, of the Sudanese Filmmaking Association. Can you tell us your plans? What has happened since you made this presentation? What's on your agenda in February 2021?
Thank you for having us, Sudanese Filmmaking Association. Our plans lays under the bullet point that we are implementing a project of developing the young talents of Sudanese filmmakers, from skillful filmmakers to create a platform for an industry and to showcase the outputs through two channels. The first channel is an OTT platform, which is called Sudan Plus or S Plus, and the other is a project of Sudan Film House, which we are implementing with CSF to make it the main and the first independent film screening.
Thank you, Mohamed. We are moving on to Nairobi, and please show us the self-presentation of the Nest Collective.
Hi, we're the Nest Collective.
Hello, we are the Nest Collective, a multidisciplinary group based in Nairobi, working with film, music, literature, fashion, visual arts, community building, and more to explore African urban and contemporary experiences. Since our beginning in 2012, we've hosted film screenings, workshops, talks, and film contests, created networks of support for funding and production of film content in Kenya, and made a couple of films of our own along the way. We are very proud to be participating in the Cinema Spaces Network and are looking forward to working with our fellow network partners to dream about the future of film production and cinema in Africa. Thanks for having us, the Nest Collective.
Hello, Njoki. Njoki is one of the 12 members of the collective. Not all of them are filmmakers, but I think dominantly you are filmmakers, cinema activists. Njoki, tell us today in February, where do you stand as a collective when it comes especially to your activities in creating new film scenes in Nairobi?
Film in Nairobi has been quite an interesting space to be in, especially considering what the pandemic did to the ways in which people shoot. For us, we were able to shoot two things last year in very kind of unorthodox ways. One of the films that we shot was remote, so we had a crew and whole setups in two completely different cities while we directed from Nairobi. That was a really interesting experience, negotiating between everybody's different Zoom situations. The other thing that we were able to do was to be able to run a COVID-safe set where we shot a feature film that we wanted to shoot originally in April. There was a lot of different things required in order to do that, which included having to do some rather significant rewrites, as well as get on board, of course, as a standard industry practice, a health practitioner whose main job was to have the COVID kind of public health situation on set completely on lock. One really fun thing, I don't know, and maybe I'm using the word fun ironically, is that happened was that the crew kept saying how the health consultant was always walking around set, sanitizing everybody's hands, really policing that masks were on every single moment, until the point that they didn't have to be on. There's also been a complete difference in the ways in which people are viewing premieres of films. And I think a whole bunch of people, including us, because the films that we're thinking through are going to have to be released this year. And the rollout of the vaccine, especially to people our age group, slightly older, slightly younger, isn't going to get to us, as far as our Ministry of Health says, until possibly 2023, 2024, unless we get very, very lucky, because they're, of course, doing a very staggered kind of rollout of the vaccine because of scarcity. And so what's going to happen is that, of course, the essential workers, such as teachers, doctors, police, etc., will definitely get the first batches, and then they're going to start from the very, very oldest members of our society, as they should. And so as regards film, definitely there's still people who are doing a bunch of cinema premieres. For us, we're trying to look in different ways, and we're really excited by the ways in which this kind of hybrid film screenings are going on. There's also an increase definitely in online kind of screen panels and conversations about film. So it's quite an exciting space to be in.
Swinging over from East Africa to West Africa, we are welcoming Cine Gimbi, a project that has been presented also within Berlinale quite a few times. Bernie is the CEO and one of the core members of an initiative in Burkina Faso which has taken a dormant cinema which existed for a very long time in the middle of Bobo Dioulasso and revitalize it. So let's look at the presentation of Cine Gimbi.
This whole story started in 2012 in Bobo Dioulasso, Burkina Faso, West Africa, where since 2005 there is no more screen, no more cinema, no more space to watch movies. The Cine Gimbi will be more than a cinema. A part of the daily program that we will have for everybody, we will also propose specific programs, because we will have workshops for the filmmakers, the producers, the distributors. We will also have, and we're starting right now, a program for the children, like image education with the schools. We have the conviction that we have a role to play for the cinema industry, also for the town, for the cultural revival of the region. And we still need to have around 6-7 months of work to finish it completely and to open it for the public.
Bernie is joining us. Some of you might see him in other sessions because he's also the producer of Garderie Nocturne, a film documentary that is screening at this year's forum. Bernie, tell us about Cine Gimbi, where, you said you don't give opening dates because of the pandemic. It has been prolonged for so long. But give us a hint of where you stand and what you're hoping for this year will bring.
Thank you, Doro, and hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be in this session. So, for the moment, exact moment that we are talking, people are working on the rooftop of the Cine Gimbi today, and they are fixing the rooftop. And so we are very happy to announce that the work, which has been stopped since 1 year, since the pandemic started, has restarted again. The work has restarted. So we hope to reopen in maybe between 4 and 7 months' time. And meanwhile, we are also doing a couple of activities, which are mainly school film education. So we are starting these days to propose film programs in the schools. And this is a new program which has never existed actually in Bobo, together with the authorities, together with the schools, and etc., etc. And we are also working on training for cultural and social entrepreneur. I don't know how you say, but it's to train the cultural activists who want to professionalize themselves. So this is also some parts of our tasks as a theater, which is more than a theater actually. So this means that we can already start activities before the actual theater is completely finished, because this is one of the main spirit that we have since the beginning, is to offer more than a cinema. So this means, of course, a part of the the daily programs. We will also have trainings. We'll also have activities for the city, for the youth, for the women, etc., etc.
Thank you, Bernie. I will take the liberty of giving a slightly longer introduction to Chopa Kabambi. He's a producer, filmmaker based in Kinshasa, but he's not in Kinshasa today, so we hope he's joining us a little later. He's on a shoot in Eastern Congo, and we don't know exactly whether or not he's joining us. Chopa has made a very nice presentation of Cinenabiso. Cinenabiso in Lingala means, no, in English means our cinema. It's an initiative that has been going on for 3 years. Let's take a look. You will also meet Chopa as the anchor in the self-presentation of Cinenabiso.
Hello, my name is Chopa Kabambi. I'm a movie maker from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Today I want to share with you our cinema project. We call it Cinenabiso, which means our cinema. The project aims to build 20 cinema theaters or more for people of all social classes. First, you have to know that in Kinshasa, there are no cinema theaters. A businessman recently opened a cinema, but entry fee is beyond what most can pay. I can't even afford it. In addition, he screens only American movies. A local cinema, 44 places. Entry fee will be $1. My team and I have been working for 2 years on this project. We plan to screen not only American movies, but African, European, Asian, and above all, Congolese. We want to put our one films on display. Additionally, we attempt to help future filmmakers in the Congo. We have good stories. We have some films, but people are unaware of our efforts because there is no distribution. We need to launch cinema in our country, and we don't have to wait. We must act now, and we need all kinds of support. We want everyone who trusts us to help. Join us, and we will build 20 or more cinema theaters accessible to people of all social classes.
I would like to open this round of discussion. We had a preliminary meeting. We were thinking of what might be really important, because not everyone who is with us in the session today might have had the privilege of attending screenings, be it in Nairobi or Burkina Faso, Sudan, or South Africa, DRC. So we thought maybe it would be very interesting to have everyone asking for a moment which really was crucial for you, where you understood something of the differences of cinema as a space when you attend screenings in your various countries. All of you have been several times to to Europe, attended European festivals, sessions, screenings. What, from your perspective, what was the moment when you understood the way of how we organize our new spaces has to be slightly different? If you could share some moments which were enlightening for you. Bernie is smiling. Please start.
Okay, I will start this. I'll go a little bit in the past. And when you mention a souvenir, what comes in my mind is a great souvenir which happened in the 90s, in the middle of the 90s in Burkina Faso, where we had, where we started our roving cinema activities with Cinomad, and we were in this very remote village in the next to the border of Mali, and we had a screening of Yelen, of the great Malian director Souleymane Cissé, a film which was released in 1987 and which is considered as one of the biggest films on from the African continent. And so we showed it for this village. There was around 1,000 persons attending the screening. And we were supposed to stay 3 days. And so we had like a program for each night. Of course, it was free of charge screenings, outdoor, and etc. And so we had our program and everything was settled. But then the next morning, we received a delegation of the old people of the village who came to visit us in our house in the village. And they said, look, you have to screen this film again tonight. And we said, no, we have other films, but we had no choice. They imposed us. And the third morning was exactly the same thing. We had to show the same film 3 times because apparently it was such a success and people wanted to see it again and again and again. And for me, this really impacted me also as a filmmaker on the power also of those films, because this film, which was shot in Mali, next to this, not far from the village actually, the people had never seen it. It was in their local language, and it was really a mirror.
Sidel, I want to mention on this occasion also that Sunshine Cinema is closely collaborating with Berlinale Talents. So you've had the chance of, for instance, attending Berlinale screenings, festival screenings here. When you compare with, a regular, if I may say so, regular village screening and how you're setting it up, could you describe differences, or is there a special anecdote that would be able to give an impression to our guests here at this session? What are important differences on which you are building up on your concept?
Sure, I think that the environment in which we screen has a big impact on the atmosphere. So we do pop-up screenings using a large-scale mobile cinema truck, as well as our cinemas that fit into a suitcase, the Sunbox. So when we do our large-scale screenings, we are able to go into a village or a town or any kind of space and create a cinema experience, whether it be outdoors using our pop-up screen, or a classroom, or a shipping container. We can create a cinema experience regardless of the infrastructure that might be there. And obviously when you go to, these European festivals like Berlinale, and you attend these very beautiful old cinemas, these independent cinema spaces that are very formal and very hushed and very comfortable and dark and quiet. There's a formality there that is not the kind of events that we are hosting. So for example, we did a tour of The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind up to Malawi, where we hosted a number of screenings of the film, which is in Chichewa, the dominant language of Malawi, in villages around tea farming communities. And we had expected maybe 100 people to show up from that village. And as more and more people learned about the screening happening, similar to what Bernie was talking about, eventually at the end of the film, I think there were about 600 people all crammed in front of the screen watching the film till the very end.
Njoki, would you continue giving a bit of your background, like with what expectations you go? Usually in Nairobi, the Nest is more or less working in an urban surrounding. So you have kind of a different target audience than, for instance, Sidel when she and Sunshine are doing rural cinema screenings. Would you be able to tell us, a key moment for you?
I mean, for us as the Nest, first of all, we do a lot of multidisciplinary work, which also means that even the films that we make are very, very diverse. So one of the things that you will find is that each film will have a different audience in different contexts for different reasons. And you'll find that screening that film in particular places will invite certain kinds of audiences, will lock out certain kinds of audiences. And so if you want your film to be seen by a large number of different types of people, then you really have to figure out a screening strategy that makes sure that it screens in more than one type of place. You can't just kind of anchor it in a cinema and then wait for everybody to come there. In Nairobi, you find that the cinemas tend to be very upmarket spaces. They tend to be kind of located in large shopping malls, which then means certain things about the price of a ticket. That can be very, very kind of, it excludes certain people within the society for many reasons. Also, not the least of which is that Kenya is also a very kind of securitized space because of the kind of attacks on public spaces that we've had that have been attributed to terrorism. And so in order to enter certain spaces, you have to be kind of patted down by a security guard who also has to search your bags, etc. Those security guards have also been known to be quite classist in their approach. And so there's certain types of people that they'll refuse to enter even a mall. Never mind the fact that the mall usually has a bank or a supermarket as an anchor tenant, and the person could be walking in literally to buy a packet of milk or a loaf of bread or whatever. So it can get very, very tricky. So in some senses, for some publics, the cinema is a wonderful place to do a premiere. In many ways, online is also great for Kenya. We've been having a general trend of reducing prices of data. They're still not what we would call affordable when you look at the wider population, but the prices have been coming down over the last few years, and because there've been a couple more players entering the field, the market has become quite competitive in that regard.
Thank you all for sharing this very, very different screening realities that are so vastly different from each other, that I would like to try and rope back. If we have the topic of decolonizing cinema, that's an equally huge space and ambition. I wonder if you go back in your experience, all of you have years and years and years of screening experience and plans for the years to come. When we try to boil this down a little bit, what, before reaching your position today, what was the initial moment where you said, well, this is in my decolonizing strategy, that particular place where I need to start? Is it finding a space? Is it finding a team? Is it, starting with screenings for small groups to get expertise? Is it a particular film? If you go back down the memory lane, how you've started, and if you would share with us how you've done it, and would you take the same road again, or where do you think is a good starting point for achieving or for looking for a decolonizing strategy?
Maybe I can start and I can speak to the idea of decolonizing cinema. I know one of the things that happens with a word like decolonize, it's a very loaded word, and people approach it with any number of different attitudes, different preconceptions, and I feel as though, I mean, the way that it is it is useful for me in the context of cinema is asking ourselves, why do we see the way we see now? Why do we value certain types of cinema the way we do, as opposed to different types of cinema? Why are we drawn to particular aesthetics more than to different types of aesthetics, even though film, as we know, is an infinite medium and there's any number of different ways to say things using film. We generally tend to use Western standards to gauge whether a film is beautiful, whether it's aesthetic or has aesthetic value, how the narratives are constructed, using kind of 3-act structures or following the particular parts of different directors and different storytellers and different auteurs who generally tend to be white and male and heterosexual. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. Why are there constant references? Why do we call the films we call classic? You see? And if we start to see the things that are in common among what we call classic and what we don't, if we start to see the things that are in common among whose films do we tend to watch and whose films we don't, we'll then also start to be in a place that can truly reflect about the idea of decolonizing. I think decolonizing is a process. I don't think it's a thing that you can say, I have decolonized my cinema experience.
Yeah,
Can I add to that? I really agree with what Njoki is saying, and I think that something that gets missed about understanding the concept of decolonization is often just the starting off point of really looking at whose knowledge is privileged. This idea of this Eurocentric knowledge production or artistic expression, as Njoki has mentioned, being the baseline, determining the quality of something, is part of the thing that needs to be dismantled. And even this idea of world cinema, that there's Europe and America, and then there's world cinema. But any cinema product that comes from somewhere in the world is of world cinema. And I think countries in the global south are really tired of this notion of always being viewed in those categories of world cinema, world music, this notion that we're still developing, we're still catching up to something of this Eurocentric standard. And that's really part of that process of that decolonization. And then it feeds down to the panels that you have, the funders that you have, the film crew that you have making those films. For example, in South Africa, a lot of the latest films that might be in vernacular languages and might speak to local experiences aren't necessarily made by Black South Africans. They're often made by white South Africans who are coming from a very particular position of privilege. And those are the spaces that also need to be decolonized in that sense.
Bernie or Mohamed, you want to add something on your idea of when it comes to, looking, for instance, in Bobo, from what I understand, Bernie, Sinegimbi has done a lot of research in order to find out what actually do the people of Bobo expect from a cinema. Could you tell us a bit about that particular approach, that you didn't just land and came with your team and said, well, we are revitalizing the cinema and we know how to do it, but you were working with a lot of people who live in the vicinity and who have become part of the team. If you could share with us how you worked in that particular environment.
Yes, actually, this decolonizing subject is very linked to the whole Sinegimbi project. Why? Because first of all, the cinema theaters in West Africa, at least what I know, were built by the colonials, by the French, and for their audience were white before 1960. Most of the countries were independent in 1960 in West Africa. So cinema was something only for the colonials. And Sinegimbi opened 3 years before the independence of the Upper Volta. And this was 1957, and this was the first theater in this whole big region, which was run by a local, an African, somebody from the town. And so this is symbolically very important. And since 1957 to 2005, when this theater shut down for many reasons. This theater was always a popular theater. They had 700 seats outdoor every day, even when it was rain. The film was there, and it was a popular theater. And for us, when we decided to refurbish it and to revitalize it, we always had in mind that we have to keep this popular character in the center of the struggle.
The Sudanese Filmmaking Association has decided not to revitalize one of those empty, dormant cinemas in Khartoum. Instead, you are working on a project which you've called the Sudan Film House, where you want to work with containers. Tell us why you thought, as an initiative, that to have a good starting point for a decolonized cinema, to not go to one of the old places, but why you rather have a new space that you envisioned for SFMA.
Okay, and Sudanese Filmmaking Association, we came to know that cinema is an independent platform. So it should be independent. It should not be linked somehow with the government or any type of control. As a freedom of speech requires the freedom of selecting the topics, freedom to showcase as on screen, whatever topics, films, any type of content that we want. So we plan to use container architecture as inspired by our fellow members from Cinema Spaces Network. We have been inspired by such a motive of using containers, just like our fellow members, to have our own independent film screening venue to provide an opportunity for filmmakers independently without the control of the government. And before the decolonization topic we were under the control of the government. We cannot make any public screening. Till now, if you want to make a public screening anywhere, you have to have a permission from the government. Even after the revolution succeeded, the new government still have laws in public screening and using the public utilities. Mentioning that the old cinemas, which have been closed by the previous Islamic regime for 30 years, were owned by individuals, but under the supervision and under the control of the government. The properties were owned by individuals and families. Now it's in, most of them are in court to decide the ownership of those cinemas. So this is a long story of inherited lands and properties that needs to be followed up by a lot of judiciary activities. So this is a long story. So that's why we prefer to have a new, independent, fully owned screening venue by the Sudanese Filmmaking Association to have full control on both the property and the activities internally.
Are there any burning wishes that you would like to share with the public, for instance, to the world cinema in an ending statement for this session?
I have something I'd like to share in relation to that. I think that it's very important for the funders of films to fund distribution better. I don't think that enough funding has been put into the distribution and audience development space, and that has led to this continuation of a neo-colonial flow of films where they go out of the continent, they go to the film festivals overseas, but they rarely make it back onto local screens. And if they do, they end up on streaming platforms that many of the audiences that we reach cannot afford to access. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we come across is that we're a third-party distributor. So we don't qualify for the existing distribution funds that exist out there because they are designed solely for the individual filmmaker to apply for distribution and marketing funding. But if that category was to be opened up a bit more to entities like ourselves, we would be able to qualify for more of that distribution funding. And with more distribution funding and more audience development, there's going to be more demand for local content. So it's a, you know, it's a cycle that isn't complete yet.
Thank you, Sidel. Yeah, Bernie.
I completely agree with Sidel, and I would like to add also, I think one of the key problems is, of course, the share on a film, on a co-production, because it's nice to say, okay, it's co-produced, very nice. But when at the end you look on the contract, what is the share of the African country on the whole global budget? Meaning, what kind of power does this African company has when we talk about international sales, when we talk about distributions, when we talk about future negotiations, when the film is finished? And this is crucial. And I think that we have to fight to get more film produced where our rights as African producers are, meaning also that we should get more money to do our films, of course.
Thank you very much for a very concrete tip to the World Cinema Fund. Mohamed, you also wanted to say something to this.
Yes, in my point of view, we need to unite to protect our screens in the first place, to grant any country of us to have its protected cinemas, and this inquires that all of us should unite to encounter any governmental or any domestic statements that can close cinemas, just like what have happened in Sudan can happen in anywhere in Africa. So to decolonize the cinemas, we have to start locally and act globally, protecting your screens from being banned or closed or your activity to be stopped. This is rapidly happening in Sudan through AIDS, and we want to protect our fellow members and members in CS to not suffer the way we suffered. So united, we can protect each other. We can lobby to protect our mandates and to have an external funding or support for developing the industry. And when I say industry, I mean industry with a long-term strategy to support the talents and to fund the emerging filmmakers. Just like what's happening in Sudan, we don't have a cinema institute, we don't have a film institute in an official level. People from Sudan travel to Egypt, travel to Europe to study and to learn cinema. So this is my point, to vitalize and to ensure that the root structures are protected for such cinema spaces to grow up and develop without the influence of governments or the external factors. So the new colonial impact of on cinema spaces is internal in Africa, and then we can think externally. So we should unite to protect our screens.
Thank you very much, Mohamed, for this strong statement for the end. For me to wrap up, it's to say a big thank you to all four of you and to Chopa, even though he wasn't here with us today. He's been very, very actively, like all the other 4 initiatives in the Cinema Spaces Network. Thank you very much to World Cinema Fund, to Berlinale, to Bernie, Sidel, Joki, Mohamed. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Doro. Thank you, World Cinema Fund.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much, Dorothee Wenner, for moderating this panel. Dorothee Wenner, she's the advisor of the Berlinale for African cinema, and she's somehow one of the initiators of Cinema Space Network. Thank you very much, Dorothee. And so I do hope we are going to work together also in the future. I don't doubt about it. And well, this is not the end of the day, also considering, again, the different time zones, but this is the end of the World Cinema Day this year. Just to remember, we were talking about African cinema. To be honest, the World Cinema Fund offers amazing, or maybe just very interesting funding facilities for African cinema, considering all the different initiatives or columns of the World Cinema Fund, and particularly now, considering the support of ACP Culture, our new, we have an initiative called World Cinema Fund ACP. And so don't doubt, I'm talking about with African filmmakers and producers, don't doubt about it, you can submit many projects to the World Cinema Fund. And talking about submissions and projects, so Ivona, we are
Exactly.
pretty busy in this
The World Cinema Fund Day 2021 has come to an end, but not our work. Our daily work continues when we go back to the office next week. A bunch of amazing, fresh submitted projects are waiting for us, are waiting to be read, are waiting to be discovered, and we are really looking forward to discover the hidden pearls behind all these projects and all these amazing people behind the projects. So Berlinale Industry Days has also come to an end, but hopefully we can greet you in person in Berlin next year.
So thank you very much for attending the show or the conversation and panels of the World Cinema Fund. Thank you very much to our invisible audience, but you know that you exist. Thank you very much, Izona.
And
goodbye.
The video will be available on demand for a long while, so if you feel that you have to come back to the conversations, to fish some quotes from our experts, welcome to visit us again during this time on YouTube.
So we're going to be on YouTube for the eternity.
Eternity, I don't know, but for the next couple of years, hopefully, yes.
So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, and enjoy. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks.